Hi, I'm Ben,
And I'm Josh.
and this is the Bad at Magic podcast, a podcast about games, life, and other things, and welcome to episode 116.
Okay, so Ben, how much do you know about the International Space Station?
Um, a little bit. So my dad used to work at a planetarium, and they have like a model about the size of a car of it hanging from the ceiling, and my dad's really into astronomy and outer space and stuff like that. And so if you ever get him talking, he'll really get going on the International Space Station. I'll admit I don't follow it as close as I used to, and definitely not as much as in the past. I know, there's half a dozen to a dozen astronauts up there at any given time of 3 to 4 different nations. There was all the cooperation in the building, different nations producing different modules, but yeah, it's probably been a good 10 years before I've read about it.
I think that also covers the extent of what I really know about it before I, dove in for the numbers thing. The idea was that it's the scientific community trying to bind the world together and be like, we all are on the same, spinning orb in space. So let's work together for a greater good, above and beyond. And then, so a bunch of different space organizations came together and designed modules. And like, as a cooperative effort, we built this thing, which really comes down to what the Chinese, the Russians, and the Americans kind of getting everything there. And then people have some modules that they submitted. That's probably a very narrow worldview, and the fact that I don't understand a lot of geopolitics because I'm American coming through, but we'll skip past that part.
Yeah, the last time I really paid attention to it was when we canceled the space shuttle program, and the main question was, how do we continue to service the International Space Station? And the only answer was Soviet Soyuz rockets.
Man, I'll tell you, I at the Air Force Academy, I got one of those hour-long briefs. They decided, this will be great military education. And then some guy came up and gave an hour-long presentation about everything that went wrong with the space shuttle program and why they shut it down.
Yeah.
I walked away from that thinking it was basically waivers. They just got waivers for everything. And there's just waivers stacked on top of waivers. Like, oh, yeah, this is fine. This is fine, like, in isolation by itself. But there were so many stacked up that, like, all of these, like, tiny, minuscule risks just compounded to be in, a catastrophically bad situation.
Several times, yes.
Yeah. Anywho, the International Space Station cost about $150 billion, which is
I thought you were going to say 116. I'm still waiting for the other shoe.
You're waiting for the 116? I'll tell you right now. Spoilers, this 116 is kind of a cop-out. The space station was operational, like the first manned mission, I think, that actually stayed there was Expedition 1. It got there in November of 2000. So it's been up there spinning for, almost a little over 23 years now. It will decay. The orbit that it's in will decay, and it will return to Earth catastrophically. They plan on it crashing into the Pacific Ocean sometime in 2031. So it does have a shelf life, and they are just going to, that's it. That's what we got out of the thing.
So was the intended service life of it meant to be within close proximity to the decay of the orbit, or was usually with these things we all right, we're going to build this thing and we intend for it to last for 10 years, and they give this incredibly short-sighted estimate, like of our rovers on Mars that were supposed to last 1 year and are up there 6 years later. Like, is that what it is, or?
Yeah, I don't know how the intended service life of it is or was.
Okay.
Everything I read is just saying it's going to crash in 2031, which is weird because I took basic, not astrological engineering. Astro. We just called it Astro. We had to take a class about astronautical engineering. There you go. And all they need to do is speed the thing up. Like, if they wanted it to stay up longer, all they got to do is slap a rocket on the outside and burn it for a little bit. They're kick up its speed.
But eventually, it's going to start developing leaks that they can't find, and, it's going to get old and busted, and they're probably just going to want to crash it anyway.
That's an interesting discussion by itself, because what we think of as old and busted is due to what? Corrosion? Like wear and tear to elements? What elements? What is it exposed to?
Microasteroids, UV radiation. It's got its own kind of decay.
Fair. Okay, fair. Well, anyway, again, back to 116. There's been a slew of missions that go up there to either add new modules or resupply it or swap out the crew or whatever. And one of the missions in this laundry list of trips up to the International Space Station was STS-116, where the Space Shuttle Discovery flew up to the ISS to... they were installing some more components. That happened in December of 2006. So I was Googling 116.
Okay, so the mission number was 116.
And that was by far the most interesting. Yes, and that let's just talk about the space station.
All right, so there's a new movie coming out. Have you seen the trailers for this movie? It's
called
ISS.
It's the one where... Yes.
So the astronauts are up together. The Russians and the Americans are manning the International Space Station. They're looking out the window and they watch Armageddon begin. Like the United States and the Soviet Union trading their entire nuclear arsenal back and forth, and the entire planet's on fire. And now they're the only living beings left, and they're both from the opposing countries that started and fought this war, and they're trapped together in the same little floating space station in the sky.
Oh, I saw another preview. Notes. Yeah, I saw another preview where they both almost simultaneously got a message from their home country saying take over the ISS at all costs or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I get that would be a cool premise. It's the same one. Yeah, it's the same one. I get that would be a cool premise. That would never happen. Holy crap, the world is on fire, and we got an email saying that we should fight too. No, they're going to crack open beers and they're going to watch the world burn.
Yeah. Roll in credits.
Well, World War Z had a great little chapter where they were talking about the people on the International Space Station. When, I don't remember what episode we talked about World War Z, but the end of the world happened. It was the zombie apocalypse. There was no space program that was going to come get them. So they were doing their best with weather forecasts and just giving whatever information that they could from their position in space down to the people on Earth. And they were stuck on the space station then for so long before they had people come rescue them that they all eventually died when they returned to Earth just from the ridiculous amount of radiation they were exposed to.
Ah. Wow. I read that book and I don't remember that part.
Every fantasy book we read, you talk about it on a podcast and then it's just gone into the ether forever.
That was sci-fi. Speaking of revisiting old intellectual properties, last time we talked about how we had become like Peter Pan in that we were young and we decided we'd never grow up. So my Haitian roommate had never seen the movie Hook. So I cornered him and I said, "Hey, Melky, let's watch Hook." And he said, "Great." So we sat down and we watched it together. And
wait. Had he seen? Wait. Did he know the story of Peter Pan? You have to understand the original
that's the thing,
Peter
Josh.
Pan before you can watch Hook, or it won't make any sense.
You're so right to ask that question. He did not know the story of Peter Pan. And you can't just tell someone the story of Peter Pan. Be like, "Oh yeah, it's this story about this girl that lives in a nursery and his boy flies in the window and takes him to Neverland and they fight the pirates and the Indians." That doesn't do it. That doesn't really instill in someone the idea that this is this mythic childhood story that represents the tension between being a child and growing up and becoming an adult. And that was supposed to be so pervasive in British culture and into American culture, where you'd either seen the movie or read the storybook and just everyone knew the story of Peter and Wendy.
Do you remember when you were a kid being afraid of growing up? Looking at your parents and be like, I don't want to be that. But then it's funny because you're afraid of it happening overnight, but it never happens overnight. It's this slow boil until you look back and you realize, oh crap, I'm not Peter Pan, I'm Hook.
My experience was slightly different than that. I was never afraid of growing up. I wasn't like, I want to stay a kid. I was envious of the power and autonomy that adults had, and I felt they were misusing it. So if I had to describe my experience, it was, I want to grow up, but I want to do it differently than they're doing it.
Oh man, adulthood is wasted on adults. If I could drive, right? If I had all the money in the world, you wouldn't believe what I would get up to.
Exactly. So yeah,
for
me,
funny?
I wanted to
now
grow
I'm
up.
Mad. Well, and I'm mad because I realize now, in retrospect, you're living that life. The Italian Job in episode 9. The fact that you're driving through some empty town in the South at some point. Like, oh, where is everybody? Oh, they're at a football game. I want to go to the football game, and you went to the football game. You're doing all these things that kids would say they would do as an adult. Ugh. Dang it,
yeah,
Ben.
I guess I kind of am. So I was, again, I'm having this weird experience where I'm experiencing something that normally would just not even register with me, but because someone who fled a third world country in the middle of a natural disaster and doesn't have the same cultural background as me is sitting beside me, I'm seeing it through new eyes. So Melky's sitting here beside me. We're watching that 1991 classic with Robin Williams and Dustin Hoffman and Julia Roberts, Hook. That's this reimagining of the Peter Pan story 3 decades later. Or however long later. Wendy's, I guess, grown up to be 80, so it's 70 years later. And that movie wasn't well reviewed. I loved it as a kid. It came out when I was 14, and it was well loved in our household. And 12. Anyway, it's a flawed classic. We'll put it that way. Have you seen it recently?
Yeah, not recently, but I mean recently enough. Like Hook is one of those movies that if Rotten Tomatoes had existed back when Hook came out, then like, yeah, all of the Siskel and Eberts were like, oh, this movie's terrible, but every Rotten Tomatoes score would have been off the chart. Like, this is great. I can't believe that they spent the gross national product of a third world country on just the set design for this thing.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It was by Steven Spielberg, and they just made these fantastical sets with giant pirate ships and roller coasters and high flying stages, and it was amazing.
You look back at these old movies where they made these giant, amazing set pieces, and like nowadays, every bit of it is fake. Everything bit of it is a green screen. You see the behind the scenes for like the Avengers movies, and I don't think they are ever in front of a real car. Like they're just in this blue box pretending to.
I bet the cars were added in post production after the bidding by the automotive companies was over.
Exactly, but then you go back to these old movies. Like these are the two that always stick out in my mind: is Hook and Waterworld. Just the scale of crap that they actually had to build and put somewhere is crazy to me.
Great examples. And so I think that gives it a little bit of retroactive cachet. Like to go back and watch this and just marvel at everything that they built. Everything has such depth. Like when they're in the Lost Boys treehouse, there's so much somebody went and built all this stuff in a way that an artist imagining something in CG just can't quite do. And the costumes, anyway, it takes like 2 hours into this movie before Robin Williams finally becomes Peter Pan again. What a waste of Robin Williams to give him. All right,
this was great. Because we were talking about like Pan a couple of times, and like it keeps popping up in our text messages because I would say something about something even tangential to Ben, I'm so old and I wish I could play games again, and you would send me a screenshot from Hook just to twist the knife one more time. And because our technology is constantly spying on us, all of a sudden all these Hook references start creeping into my TikTok feed. And one of the TikToks I got that I resonated with, I sent it to you and I resonated
it's the Bader-Meinhof
hard
principle, but yes.
Fair, yes, confirmation bias, blah, blah. Shut up, Ben. I want more whimsy in my life than you're allowed. This TikTok said, when I was a kid, it baffled me that it took Robin Williams 2 hours into the movie to think of a happy thought so he could fly. Now that I'm an adult, I totally get it. And I sat and I for at least 10 seconds, I stared at the ceiling. I'm like, what is a truly unpolluted, unbiased, no asterisks or footnotes, happy thought that I could come up with? And I have no way of testing that criteria. I came up with a couple that might work, but
you would need some fairy
dust.
dust to truly confirm it. Yeah. Okay. Man, that's so great. Josh, I love that you just sit and ponder things like that sometimes. Listeners, if you're pondering this right now, I want to hear if you think you have something that truly, if somebody could sprinkle some pixie dust on you, what would raise you up off the floor? All right. Well, anyway, I watched this with my friend, and I marveled at it. I also felt like, yeah, this thing probably could have used some more editing. It could have been about 15 to 30 minutes shorter and still been just fine. But if you think of all the like for instance, when he falls out of the sky and he's in the middle of the garden and the flowers are smelling him, like all that, they were just a little bit too enamored with their own whimsy, and maybe they'd spent so much on set design they wanted to commit more of it to film.
Listen, Mr. Sweater Vest, calm down. They were building, they were just trying to reinforce the idea of how fantastical the environment was. That was very important. It's like, oh, they could have cut all this stuff out and gotten right back to the story.
But the one thing that I completely didn't tire of at all and couldn't get enough of is Steven Spielberg's casting of child actors. That man just has a way with getting the most out of kids. Ooh. Specifically, the characters that play... I mean, there's all the Lost Boys, and there's so many kids in this movie. But the two best are the two that play Jack and Maggie, Peter Banning's children. They took my breath away with just the depth of emotion they had in these characters that were fictional. It completely absorbed me to the point where it felt real. And I went and looked these two up, and neither of them really had an acting career after that. The boy that played Jack, the disappointed son whose father doesn't come to his baseball games, he ended up becoming I think an actual lawyer. Went to like Harvard Law, and he actually became Peter Banning.
He was not paying attention to the moral of the story.
Right. Anyway, I enjoyed watching Hook again. Recommended.
It's a good one.
Good trip down memory lane.
Bangarang.
Josh, you went on an adventure yesterday I wasn't expecting, but I guess this is an annual tradition in the Fleshman house now.
I don't know how much this is an adventure. So anyway, yes, the Phoenix Zoo, in shockingly all places, it's in Phoenix. They have an annual fundraiser 5K that they do. And they always, their shtick is that they'll take all those funds and they point it at one thing. We are going to take this money and we're going to make it go towards this specific project. And then all of the marketing materials, all of the race, everything is then marketed at, like, this is what you're supporting. So 2 years ago, they were trying to build a new meerkat enclosure. And so they were raising funds for that. And so, like, all of the race products, all the posters, everything had, like, meerkats on it. Last year, this one was a weird one. Like, I think they were just trying to pay for their big dinosaur exhibit that they had already had at the zoo for a while. And so it was the Outrun Extinction event. And, like, the shirts had dinosaurs chasing people. And so that was fun. This year... This year was the Lions. It was for the Lions enclosure, and it was something like the Lions Run Tonight or something like that. I don't know. It was all lion themed, and so we got like.
So that's why all the shirts you had in the photos had pictures of lions on them.
Yes, everything is going to their new lion exhibit.
Do you think this is effective as a way of marketing just an annual 5K at the zoo?
I don't know, but I think I enjoy it because it's not just another generic T-shirt. For example, we also do every year our local town has a turkey trot, which is a 5K that happens on Thanksgiving morning. And every year it's just some variation of a turkey with sneakers. Like the iconography never changes and it's just the generic shirt. But this is cool because it's different every time. And I don't know. Yeah. We were just talking about it. I always am looking for opportunities to have more whimsy in my life.
Nice. Well, I love that you stopped and looked at the lions on the run to benefit the lions.
We did stop on the run. Now, this is one thing about this run that isn't ideal, is that the zoo it feels like a big zoo, but when you actually start trying to clock like how far and distance-wise everything is in the zoo, it's actually really not that big. So the first mile and a half that you're running is in their parking lot. And it feels like a high school PE lesson because they make you, I'm not even joking, this is not an exaggeration, it's 4 laps. And they just put these cones up and you go back and forth in this big parking lot outside 4 times. And then you run into the zoo and then you do the last mile and a half like around in the zoo. Huh. But there's a point where you round a corner and you're running perpendicular to these laps that are going back and forth. And even my kids commented, like, this is kind of crazy. I'm like, yeah, actually, it kind of is. Because you see these 4 lanes of people all running opposite directions just at different depths of field. And it is so
they got tents of barriers. Like you're in a queue in the DMV.
Yes. Yeah. And people are running, and they're competing with the people that are walking, and they're competing with the strollers that are running everybody over. And the last time you've been to a zoo, some of those pathways aren't super wide. And like I said, they're trying to build as much distance as they can. So there's one path where you have to go all the way down to this dead end, loop back around, and then run the opposite way. So it's cut in half. It's a little tight. It's not the best 5K in the world, but what the great part is, as soon as you
definitely
finish,
can't speed run it.
You can't. No, it's not. You can't. That's not what it's about. Once you finish, they have you get a free hot cocoa and a bag of kettle corn, and they have the zoo open for the next 3 hours that you can walk around, and they still have their lights up from Christmas, so they have all the Christmas lights, and everything's got all the trees are wrapped in like a million LEDs, and so it's kind of cool that way.
Wow, that sounds great. Okay.
We had a fun time.
Go.
Yeah. We
some
finished
lovely photos. Link in the show notes.
Yes, plenty of photos.
Josh, I want to ask you about something. This is one of those like life strategy kinds of things. When you go grocery shopping? Well, I know you did some. I can't even figure. Okay, I doubled back on myself like 3 times. I know during COVID, you guys started ordering groceries online and going to pick up. Are you still doing that, or do you sometimes go to the grocery store and walk around?
They keep. No. Our grocery store keeps threatening that they're going to charge us to pick up groceries instead of going inside, but they haven't pulled the trigger on that yet. And so probably 95% of the groceries that come into my house are delivered from the store into my car. There are very rare exceptions where I have to get up and go inside to get a handful of things, but it's never a full-up shopping trip. Those are terrible.
Okay. So I still do the traditional grocery things. I've never tried the delivery thing. I guess I could. I just don't want to. That being said, what is your ethic or strategy related to a cart in a store? Let's say you're going in a store, you've got a cart, you grab it at the entrance, you take it in with you, and you start getting items in it. Let's say you get 2 aisles down, and you realize you forgot something 2 aisles back. Do you take the cart with you and go 2 aisles back?
So yes, like the cart in general is with me forever and always. There are rare exceptions where I will abandon the cart to go down like a particularly crowded aisle to grab a handful of things and then bring it back to the cart.
Yep. Okay, so you look down an aisle and there's people coming both directions and it's really crowded and you're like, I just need a thing in the center. I'll leave the cart here at the end and walk in, grab the thing, and come back out.
Yes.
Do you make an effort to try to keep the cart in view?
No. Because that's grocery. All right, don't even. I can feel where this conversation is heading.
No. Like you're wrong.
The contract is if this cart is here in the middle of the store, not at the front somewhere, and there's stuff in it, that means somebody is actively using this cart. Don't steal my cart. And it hasn't been stolen yet. Okay.
So somehow my wife got the ethic that you gotta always keep your cart with you. So sometimes when we're shopping together, and I'll do this, I do it very naturally. I'll abandon the cart at a moment's notice for no reason. Like I forgot something, I'm going back, it's too crowded ahead. Every reason you said, I'll leave the cart and walk away.
I have to interrupt your story. You at least park it somewhere out of the way. Like you identify a location.
Absolutely.
Where it's not
I try to look at a spot where it's like not high traffic or not an item they're going to need, behind a pole, something like that, where it's not going to be a problem.
Good.
So I park it in a good spot and then walk freely without having the additional unwieldiness of having the cart with me. I can go faster, I can weave through crowded places, all those things, and I always get back in the carts where it was, which is not normally a problem, but when one person that does it that way goes out with another person that doesn't, there's a little bit of friction. The first couple of times I did it with my wife, she'd look at me and go, "What are you doing?"
What's the cart? You can't abandon the cart. There are people watching on the cameras, and they will scoop it up and restock all those shelves if you leave it for more than 3 seconds.
I don't think that's what she was afraid. I didn't ask her specifically what she's afraid of, but I think some of the things she said made me think that she was afraid of other customers, not of the store. Like, I've never been afraid of the store because they're busy. If I leave a cart full of groceries out, they'll get to it at the end of their shift. They're not going to come swooping in and take it in the middle of the.
Well, but that's the more logical one. Afraid of other customers. Like, who in their right mind is going to walk up to a cart with groceries and be like, "Oh, cool, a cart," and what? Flip the cart over and dump everything on the ground and just take the empty cart with them?
Okay, so I've always lived by this because my entire life I've never had a problem with the way that I do it. That I abandon the cart at a moment's notice because I want the flexibility that comes with trying to walk around not having a cart. So generally the cart just progresses through the store with me, and I move about freely if I need to go back or get things or it's crowded. So last night I went to Walmart with Milky. I got into the store because of what we were doing. I was helping him pick out some home improvement items for his house because he needed to fix a couple of things, and I was helping him. And then I was in the middle of Walmart, and I realized I didn't have a cart yet. So I was going to I got to go all the way back to the entrance to get a cart, and there was a cart sitting there with nothing in it. And I stood there next to it for a second. I looked to the left and I looked to the right, and nobody's coming. So finally I grab it, and I start to push it, and it has one of those gimpy wheels that goes ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. And I realized, somebody probably just abandoned this one because it sucks. So I didn't feel bad about taking it. I just took it. I'm like, oh, well, I'll deal with the sucky cart instead of walking all the way back to the entrance.
I am glad that the cart had a chunky wheel, because otherwise you have absolutely no right to take a cart that is not at the entrance of the store.
You're right. I have violated the social contract, the same social contract that I've always counted on other people not violating because it would disrupt the way I do it. So, Milky and I have one night a week that we exchange cooking. Like, he cooks a meal and then it's my turn next. And some of the ingredients I needed are the kind of things you normally just have on stock at your house, but I don't because this isn't my house.
Right. Okay.
So I'm wandering around looking for random ingredients like balsamic vinegar and,
What is the smallest quantity of pink volcanic salt that I can buy?
Yes, exactly. So I'm getting these things, but I don't want to get too much. And so I'm wandering, and they're kind of hard to find. And at one point I realized I forgot something 2 aisles back, and I do the thing. I leave the cart. I've got about 4 items that I really had to search hard to find, and there was only like one left in the cart. And I walk away, and I came back, and my cart was gone.
Someone stole it.
Someone stole my cart. And I kind of felt this twinge of karma because I'd stolen that cart.
This was the cart that you had stolen. For some reason, I thought these were two different stories, but it was the cart that you stole.
It was the cart I was stolen.
Okay.
And then it was stolen.
You know what happened?
For a minute, I thought maybe I just forgot where I left it. So I'm standing there.
You can't forget where you leave a cart.
Yes, you can. It was late at night at Walmart, and they'd started to bring out the pallets of new food to put out. So there was big pallets where you couldn't see, and I couldn't remember if I'd done it 2 aisles up or 1 out. Anyway.
What, do they change the lighting? The geography of the region changed? Like, how do you lose a cart?
I wandered around. I'm getting old, Josh. So I look around, and the cart's not there. And I'm standing there with my hands on my hips. I'm like, crap, now I got to go all the way back to the front of the store, which is what I was trying to avoid in the first place. Get the cart and find the 5 items that I'd already found that were hard to find. And it's just like instant schmack, 10 minutes added onto my grocery trip. And then I look right next to where I thought I'd left the cart, and when someone stole the cart, they'd taken all my items out of the cart and just put them on the nearest display.
Oh, yeah, it was legit stolen. Somebody just straight up stole. Well, I'm not going to say your cart. I'm going to say they stole that cart, because here's what I'm postulating in my mind, okay? Somebody brought a cart in the middle of the store with a chunky wheel, and then you assumed that it was abandoned because of the chunky wheel. But they were just pulling a U. They had left the cart at the end of the aisle. They had walked down to go get their frozen pizza. And in the meantime, some jerk walks up and like, oh, cool, free cart. And then walks off with their chunky wheel cart. And they came back with their frozen pizza like, where did the cart go? And then later they found a cart that had been abandoned. I'm like, you know what? They pushed it 3 feet, felt that chunky wheel. I'm like, this is 100% my cart that was stolen from me. And they stole it back.
Okay. So I pick up my 5 items, and I'm trying to decide if I need like 5 more items, and I'm trying to decide if I can just do this as an arm load. So I instead of going back, so I'm walking around with my 5 items in my arms, and I grab 2 more items, and I'm finally like, I can't do this. And I'm standing in front of the cheese cooler, I'm holding all this stuff, and I just set it down on top of like the grated cheese in the chilled basket. So there's like some cherry tomatoes and some basil and some balsamic vinegar and some olive oil and stuff all just kind of piled on top of the cheese. I'm like, I can't do this anymore. So I go to get a cart, and then I see and I go to get a cart and I see Melky. I'm like, oh, Melky, just bring your cart over here and I'll put my groceries in. And I go back and all the groceries that I'd gotten were gone. Like I'd left them on top of the cheese in the cooler, and now that's gone. So now I don't have a cart, and all my groceries have been reshopped.
Okay, so now I have a new theory. What you said it was late at night at Walmart, right?
Yeah.
All right, there was 2 security guys. One of them watching the cameras, and the other one with a radio that were straight up just messing with you for their own entertainment.
So I look down about 20 feet away. There's a guy in a Walmart name tag restocking the pudding. I'm like, hey man, did you see some groceries that were right here? He's like, yeah, I picked them up and I stuck them in the box. It's over there. So I look over and there's a box, and he solved 2 of my problems. 1, it's got all my items in it, and 2, now I don't got to go to the front of the store and get a cart anymore.
Well, you didn't have to go to the front. You found Milky, and Milky had a cart.
Yeah, but he didn't understand. Language barrier. He didn't understand what I said. He left. I turn around, Milky's gone. So I'm back on my own again.
Yeah, I took him off the cheese because who in their right mind leaves an armload of random assorted groceries on the grated cheese? I assumed either that person was abducted by aliens in the middle of their shopping, or I don't know, were like shot in the leg and had to immediately go to the hospital. Like, who does that?
And also, it's really common, I think, around here for people to like decide they don't want something and just put it on the nearest shelf instead of taking it back to where they got it or taking it up to the front and giving it to them and say they don't want it.
That's different. Like, I've seen those happen. Have you ever been? You go shopping
you can
and you'll
see
go down
someone's
like
decision.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly where I was going. You're walking down the candy aisle, and like they're right next, like on top of the giant bag of fun-sized Butterfingers is a small box of overpriced like Whole Foods granola bars. And you're like, yeah, somebody made a decision here.
Yep. Or even sometimes it's like there's a box of graham crackers and then a regular size one, and then there's the jumbo size box that's on sale 50% off, and so then there's
I actually did that the other day. I was walking around my grocery store. One of the few times I went in there, I'm like, you know what I'm really feeling? We're going to watch a football game. I want some of that processed meat, cheese, and crackers. That's what I'm going to have for lunch. I go inside and I get a block of cheese, and I got some meat from the normal area that you get the meat from.
I know where this is going.
And then I'm walking by, and there's like an end cap. It's like, oh, check out these salamis that are 50% bigger than the one that you got, and they're on sale for 20% off. And so, yes, maybe
you just
perhaps,
put the one that you had on the shelf.
Yeah, one of the generic cheapo big salamis got replaced by one of the nice ones from elsewhere in the store. Maybe that happened. I can't confirm or deny.
So, to wrap it up, the moral of the story is the thing I thought was never going to happen happened to me twice in one night.
Now, I want to stay on this topic for just a little bit longer because there's a tangential thing about it. Have you ever gone into the grocery store with the intent, I'm going to get 3 things, 3, and I know how big they are?
I have a law about this. I have a numerical law about this.
Okay. Well,
but go ahead.
So this is the situation I find myself in sometimes where I'm getting 3 things, and I'm walking through and I have those 3 things, and on my way through the store I'm like, well, I mean, I'm here. I might as well just grab this while I'm at it. And then I grab one more thing until I'm at the point where I'm all the way in the back of the store and like I really wish I had grabbed like a basket.
So if you were going to describe this as an algebraic equation, X being the number of things you came in the store to get, how would you express this in terms of an algebraic equation?
Ooh, so like Y being how many things you end up getting equals some multiplier of X, the things that you intended to get.
Yes.
Okay, I will say this. If it's just me walking into the store, I'm going to say 1.5 to 2x, okay? That's the equation. Okay. Y equals 1.5 to 2x. If my kids are with me, it's Y equals 1.5 to 2x plus 2. They each get something. Like, period, I can't get around that. There's just an addition there. If it's the whole family, then it's out the window. It's like Y equals, I don't know, X squared. Because my wife is going to get whatever she wants, and I'm not going to give her any guff for it.
Okay. Yeah, for me, it's Y equals 2x. And this is specifically for, like, a short trip. This is just going to be a short trip. I only need 2 things. If I go in for 2 things, I'm coming out with 4. If I go in for 5 things, I'm coming out with 10. Above that, it gets fuzzy. But, if it's like less than 10, I'm going in for just, less than 5.
Yeah.
It's y equals 2x.
Yeah. Well, my problem is, I think on this specific trip that I'm remembering about this problem is I'm a smart guy. I know I'm going to end up with 1.5x of the things that I want. And so I always come in and I look for the basket stack. But I think the basket stack was empty. And instead of stopping at that point and getting a cart, which was 3 feet farther away, my
you were
stupid,
just like, I'll just hold it in my hands.
Yeah, my gorilla brain's like, I can carry all of this, no problem. And it ended up being like 2 cases of soda and a bunch of small loose articles. So no, it wasn't very easy.
Yeah. Well, I think the takeaway here is that my wife was right, and from now on, I'm going to leave my cart in view. Watch it out of the corner of my eye.
I don't know. How many times have you been shopping and it happened once?
I know. That's enough. That's enough.
Actually,
how many times have you been out in public with your children and they only got kidnapped once?
Hang on. Okay, that's that. Okay, straw man argument. Like, we're not talking about that one. Here's where I went with this. Actually, this has happened to you 0 times because that wasn't your cart. You stole it from someone else.
Josh, since the last time we recorded Bad at Magic, you also had another adventure. You took your family to see Disney on Ice, and you texted me that you were impressed with the technology. I said, I want to know more about this. So tell me about the technology of Disney on Ice.
Okay, so this was a target of opportunity. We were downtown anyway. Like we had an obligation. We had to go downtown Phoenix for.
You went to Disney on Ice on a whim?
Kinda, yeah. Because I told my wife, hey, we got to go downtown on this day. Like, you want to grab lunch somewhere while we're down there? And then 15 minutes later, she goes, oh, they've got tickets on sale, Disney on Ice, in the cheap seats for $25 a seat.
And it's coming up, and it's in an hour from now.
No, it was a couple of days. We had a full
okay, so you planned it out.
Yeah.
All right.
Listen, we're never walking by a place and just say, oh, let's go do that. That's not a thing that happens in my family. I need lead time.
Okay, I would totally do that, but yeah.
Well, yes, we've been over this already. You're that guy. You're Peter Pan flying from thing to thing, and I'm banning over here trying to deconflict my schedule.
Okay.
So yes, we $25. We sat in the cheap seats at Disney on Ice, and honestly, we as we were watching it, I realized our kids are way beyond like the age group that this thing is set up for.
Okay.
This
is targeting the like 6 to 12-year-old.
No,
the age bracket they're in.
They're targeting. They were targeting like I feel like 4 to 7 is. I feel like that's the demographic because my son was just bored. He was just bored. And then, so I was talking to him about all of that. Well, while we're looking at this, and we were up in the rafters, so like, oh, well, why don't you look at this? I told him whenever I'm at stuff like this, and I don't care about particularly what's going on, I marvel at the choreography. I think about the fact that somebody had to think about 12 people on ice skates making elaborate patterns, getting them from place to place to place, and making it all look good somehow. That's what I marvel at. And so he started commenting to me about like different things like that. So I got his mind engaged in a different way. So that was a win there. I think my daughter was still probably on the upper edge because she was floating between like bored and like, oh, well, that was cool and like watching and paying attention. But they basically just redid Frozen and then Encanto. Like that was it. That was their 2 acts. Like Act 1, we just recreated the movie Frozen on ice skates. And then there was intermission and then they did Encanto. Whole thing was less than 2 hours. But at the same time, again, I'm bored. This is not for me. And so I'm looking at all of the other stuff that's going on. And so one of the things that they did that I thought was really cool is, first of all, I was talking to my son about how this is a basketball stadium. How are they on ice? And so like, oh, the refrigeration. And they turned a basketball stadium into an ice rink, for a weekend. And then they had this giant wall that was like the one side of the stadium where everybody was coming in and out of, and all the set pieces and things were flowing in and out of. And that was so cool because at first I thought it was just a big screen because they clearly weren't projecting images onto it. You can tell when something is being projected from elsewhere. No, this was just a screen. I was like, oh, those are just, giant heavy LED panels or whatever. But no, they were weird shapes. They were like big weird triangles, and they kept swinging apart and changing shape to allow larger or smaller set pieces in. And I guess it just made me think about, I guess, TV technology is a lot lighter, cheaper, and smaller than I thought it was, or that I'm anchoring on, I guess. They had big set pieces that kept coming out onto the ice, and they were not pushed by anybody. They were clearly giant remote control robotic things. For the Frozen set piece that was supposed to be the ice castle, they had this, it was stairs on both sides that had this big arch, and they were skaters that were constantly skating underneath it. So just imagine an arch with stairs on both sides, but nobody ever pushed it anywhere. The thing just kind of drove itself out to where it was supposed to be and then clamped onto the ice. I don't know what it did, but it just sat there and became a sturdy object for people to do stuff with. There was, there was a wagon. The wagon, I don't even know the guy. Sven in Frozen. He had a wagon that they rode on, or a sled, I guess, when they were chasing Elsa. That one was easier to explain because there was a box on the back of it that you could tell when the light hit it right that box was transparent from the other side. So there was clearly a dude in like a little ice go-kart that was driving that thing around as ice skaters were jumping on and off of it. And my son noticed too, and he's like, there's a guy in there. I'm like, yeah, that'd be a cool job, just driving this little ice tank around while stuff is happening around you. Okay, this is going to sound stupid, but concessions. I'm the dad. I was sent, like, we need beverages and we need snacks. I mean, everybody needs to be satisfied while we are here. And so I went downstairs to one of their snack places. And this is at Footprint Center, which is the basketball arena in Phoenix, okay? And I have been there.
It's where the Suns play.
It's where the Suns play. I have been there recently. I've been there recently enough that this exact same concession area that I went to, it's like the grocery store one, where you go in, there's a bunch of coolers and a bunch of stuff. You grab a bunch of stuff, and you go check out. And I set it all down on a counter, and they rung it up, and I left. That was 6 months ago. I went to exactly the same one for Disney on Ice, and it was completely backwards. I went up to the front, and there was like little registers or little things. And it's like, oh, yeah, just tap your card here, and then you're going to get tracked by the 6,000 cameras that we have inside the thing. Whatever you grab, we will ring you up for as you walk out of this place.
Okay, wow. I want to talk about this for a sec. So did you have a moment where you're like, how can I trust this thing that it's not going to charge me for someone else's groceries?
Well, this is
part of me geeks out on that. Like, that sounds really cool, but I've also done the thing recently where you go into 7-Eleven and you just put what you want on the little thing and it takes a picture of it. But I've had about a 50% success rate with that. I don't know if it's just me. I pick things that it doesn't recognize easily, but it doesn't always get it right.
So I did one of those recently, and it nailed it. We went to the Nutcracker, as a matter of fact. Their checkout for the concession was that way. They had a couple of fridges of random drinks. I think this is probably where it succeeded, is because for my instance, there was only probably 36 different things that you could have possibly purchased. And so, like, limiting that inventory probably
so
made
the
it a lot more
possibility for
successful.
false positives is pretty low.
Yeah. And so when I put the stuff down in the little camera reading area, it did a great job of ringing me out. But at the same time, there wasn't a huge selection of things that I could have gotten.
I love the idea that we're still doing the thing where you bring a stadium full of people together and you put them all in a tiny place and you want them all to get concessions. And there'll be these narrow moments of time where there's like a break in the action and everybody will try to go out and get concessions in. And you need to maximize the flow and throughput during that time. And you can only get minor gains in improving the traditional ways of doing it. But you could turn the whole thing on its ear and get a huge gain by doing it a completely different way.
Yes, I paid up front, and they said it's going to put a hold on your card for $20, and then it'll clear and process at some point in the next 24 hours, and then you'll be charged for exactly what you were supposed to be charged for. And I'm of the person, I love technology, and so I was fully, I'm in. Yeah, that sounds great, fantastic, thank you so much. I just walked in there assuming that the solution was robust and ready for production. Now you're making me think that, what happens if there was false positives? What happens if I did get rung out for somebody else's stuff? And I'm realizing to them, it doesn't matter. To the concession people running the thing, like, they're getting paid for all the inventory that comes out of the place, right? It falls back on me. Do I want to accept the risk of picking up that guy's $3 water bottle that wasn't necessarily mine?
Yeah.
I think I'm willing to accept that risk for the stupid amount of convenience that thing offered, Ben.
Yeah,
because I walked in there with.
I'm ready for that.
I was able to walk in there with my son. I'm like, all right, grab the things that you want. I'll grab the things that I want. And then we just left. It took 2 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah. I bet, if you could be like, well, if we move the cash register a little bit to the left, or we add an extra cashier, or, we reverse the order of the items so that these items come first, you're still just going to get these minor incremental gains. But if you say, hey, just have them pay, and then as many people as can fit in there and get out, we've tracked it all and we get it. Like that must be a huge gain in throughput.
This is coming. This is going to come to the grocery stores. Years ago, I swear, there was an experimental grocery store where they had RFID tagged every piece of inventory that came in. You just load it in your cart, you pushed it through like those big scanners on the way out, and it just rang everything up within 4 seconds. How can this not be a thing already in grocery stores?
So in Europe it was. Did I ever tell you about this? In Europe and Italy, the grocery store we went to, not RFID, but basically handheld price scanners. You just scan your stuff as you put it in your cart. You
did that
immediately
once.
bag it, and then you just pay as you walk out. So in Italy we got used to it, and then in England we used it exclusively. And now I go to Sam's Club because they let me use an app on my phone that lets me scan everything and pay for it and then just walk out. So I do it all the time.
I shop for my groceries online and they bring it out to my car. So I guess that's kind of the same thing, where we're just going to get rid of the part of the grocery store that has to be stocked. All right, that's it. You know what? That's the solution. It's like, okay, my local Fry's is just not allowing anybody in anymore. And internally, it's just going to be a bunch of Amazon robots driving around fulfilling my order and then putting it into little bins that then get shipped out to my car when I show up. That's what it's going to be.
All right, Josh, it's time for a Bad at Magic segment. So yesterday I played in a standard tournament that my store was holding. They called it a win-a-box standard tournament. It wasn't at the competitive REL, and that relates here to what happened. So there was a lot of prizes at stake, but there was people playing, and I accidentally cheated.
Okay, before we go any further, Ben said REL. That's rules enforcement level. Depending on the thing that you are playing in, there are different rules that are enforced. And so the competitive REL means like the baseline. This is now a competitive event. There's a handful of things that we are going to do as the tournament organizer to enforce the rules. But that didn't happen.
Right. No, this wasn't. There was no judge. There was no rules enforcement, and there's some trappings that immediately you will see if you're at an event that's in competitive REL. One of them is if you're playing in a format like standard, you register your list of cards that you're playing with.
Yes,
so you're bringing a constructed deck with you.
Yeah, if you bring a deck of cards, in order to confirm that your deck is actually legal in the tournament that you're playing in, you have to write down every card that's in it. Give it to a judge who reviews that list of cards and verifies that they are all tournament legal. And hang on, I'm not even done. And then they do random deck checks where one, they will take the deck of cards out of your hand and make sure that you're not doing anything nefarious like marking the card somehow so you know what's coming up. And then two, compare it to the list of cards that you wrote down. And if they don't match, you're out, buddy. That's it. You're done.
Yeah. Okay. So we're playing in this event. There's no judge, but there is the agreement that you're following those rules as far as it can be enforced when you're not having those external mechanisms, random checks, pre-provided lists. There's the assumption that everyone you're playing with brought cards that are legal for the format that you're playing in and that they're not marked or anything like that. So we only had, I think, 8 or 10 players, so the whole thing was only going to be 3 rounds. So I played the first round and won, I played the second round and won, and I matched up in the finals against a guy, and it was kind of a tough matchup. We'd gone to the third game. I was clearly winning, and I drew one of my cards that I'd sideboarded, and I tapped and played it, and he goes, wow, that's a really strong card. I don't think that's legal in standard.
Yo, you went through the entire standard tournament without a standard legal deck? You got to the finals with a list that was illegal?
So my chaotic good's going to clash with your lawful evil here, Josh. So all these things went through my mind because until the moment that he looked at my card and said, I don't think that's legal in standard, I did not know that I had not presented a legal deck at this event. Let me go back in time a little bit. And tell some people that don't know anything about Magic kind of what's going on. So Magic has several constructive formats. There's all of the cards that have ever been printed, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of 25,000, is a format called vintage. And you can play with like almost any of those. Then there's, for reasons, there's subsets of that. There's a format called legacy, which is all of those with some banned cards. And then there's a format called extended, which is all of those back to like 2006.
Is extended still a thing? I thought we got rid of extended. I think it's
modern.
modern.
Sorry, I meant to say modern. Modern, which is like everything from now back to 2006 with a big list of banned cards. And then there's a bunch of others.
Don't say a bunch of others. There's Pioneer, which is the new modern.
There's Pioneer, which is...
It's exactly like modern, except modern was 2006, and now Pioneer goes back to what, 2019, something like that.
I can't remember. And then there's
standard
also
goes back like
Explorer.
A couple years. No,
yeah,
okay.
But
Explorer's
standard
different.
used to just. Yeah, exactly. That's why I waved
my
hand.
Explorer only exists on Arena, and that's because Arena doesn't have all of the cards back from 2019 or whatever they drew. I
don't want to get so bogged down on this. We're losing my mom right now, Josh.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Anyway, from a business point of view, it's good for them to have a format where they want people to need to buy the latest set of cards in order to continue participating in it. And Standard tended to be that. It's a constructive format that's only about the last year or two's worth of cards, and you need to continually buy new cards in order to have a competitive deck. And there's lots of turnover, and it's interesting, and the metagame changes a lot. Anyway, they recently, just because they've been releasing so many new products so quickly, they increased the rotation time from Standard from like the one most recent years to like 2 or 3 most recent years. And so it cast this fog about what was legal for it, not because it's unclear, but because it's new. It's different.
And this is a change that they made. We talked about this on the podcast a little bit, is making the Standard format 4 years instead of 2 really does change quite a bit. Like the card pool is twice as big. But at the same time, like, I can see where you're coming from, because in the last 4 years, they've released like at least 3 sets that are not Standard legal, that are supposed to go straight back to Modern.
That's where I'm going. It's just this massive complexity. So on paper, when you ask what cards are legal in Standard, it's very easy to know. Like if I build a deck and make a list of that deck, I can look up every single card in that deck in a database that will say that card is or isn't legal for Standard. Because there's a list of the sets that are legal in Standard, and then there's a list of the cards that are banned, and as long as it's in one list and not on the other list, then you can have up to 4 copies of it in your deck. So, but during this last 4 years, they've also started to do a lot of things where they give like packs that come with cards in them, like a special card is one of the 15 cards that isn't even legal in the set that it came in the pack of.
Yeah. This is the extra sheet that they're printing, like the Mystical Archive or like the old artifacts. Yeah. Those are a huge business thing, because there's a huge value add, because you can get something really expensive in this pack. Like, again, it's just more business incentive to buy the Standard stuff.
So my personal process for how I was to keep all this separate was that whenever a Standard rotation would have, I would go through my box that I keep all my rares in, and I'd keep everything in chronological order so that I know what the dividing line is. So I have a set of cards that I keep that I know are Standard legal. So I wanted to build a deck that was 5-color humans, and when you build a 5-color deck, like, if you wanted to try to figure out the mana base from scratch, it was going to be problematic. So I went and found a list online of one that had somebody done similar to that was legal, and I built it pretty close to what they had, but I didn't have all the cards. At the end of this, I was about 4 or 5 cards short of what I needed to build out this list. So I'm like, well, I can basically play any legendary humans of any color. So I got out my boxes of the last 3 years worth of cards and just went through them looking for legendary humans. But mixed in those, I had some of these mystical archive cards, I think.
Okay.
And I just didn't check.
Okay. So I have to know, which card did you play that you thought was Standard leader that absolutely isn't?
I'll have to put it in the notes because okay, I'll just edit this out, but let me go grab them. Hang on. Okay. So the cards that I had in my sideboard, I didn't even run them in my main deck, were Shanid, Sleeper's Scourge, and Imard the Stormcleaver. And I either got these because they were on that like bonus sheet you said, or they were in like promo packs from the sets that were in Standard.
Oh, my man. Yeah. So okay, so first of all, Imard the Stormcleaver. That is the universe within reprint of Guile, Sonic Soldier from the Street Fighter 2 stuff. So back in the day, they did a
standard legal.
It's not legal in almost anything because they did a secret lair of
legal in Commander.
They did a Street Fighter set, and here, this is actually very interesting in the business way because we talked about this a little bit before. Wizards of the Coast is going to other intellectual properties and printing cards from those intellectual properties. And when it first happened, which was the Street Fighter 2 cards, people were kind of pissed off because they were only released in a secret lair. You can only get these completely unique Magic cards if you pay us extra money and only through this venue. And so,
yeah, I think I got this one in one of those like promo packs that you win on Friday nights.
Well, let me land my plane. This is the idea, to quell that uprising of like, I'm not paying you $50 for this card, but I can't get it any other way, and that's not fair. They said, okay, here's the deal. If we print expanded universe cards from other intellectual properties, and we only ever release them in secret layers, we promise someday we will release them in another product as a universes within version. What you have is functionally identical to a Street Fighter 2 card that they released, I don't know, like years and years ago, and finally got around to printing and putting it into a promotional product that you could get for minimal cost. So no, it's not legal. It's them like fulfilling
all
their
I was
agreement.
Looking. So all my criteria was I was looking through my binder for legendary humans that were versatile for my 5-color human stack.
Fair enough. That's an honest mistake to make because you didn't know where Imard the Stormcleaver came from. However, and I'm gonna punch you in the face over
yes, this is lawful evil versus Cat of Good. I didn't check. I didn't check.
No. Stop talking about checking. Shanid, Sleeper's Scourge, this Morto human that you're talking about, this red, white, black.
Yeah.
Look at the set symbol, man. That is a commander-only set symbol on that card.
I don't know that set symbol. It kind of looks like some of the other set symbols.
It's the Dominaria
But that's what my opponent
United.
noticed immediately.
Yes, it's the commander-only version of the Dominaria United. All right, so now Wizards is doing this other thing this is probably where you fell victim to. Every set that comes out, they have a subset of cards. There's like a handful of cards that they're like, oh, these could be a part of this set, but we're going to make them commander-only. And they get a unique set symbol that is printed on the card that looks very similar to the set they came from, but it is different enough that's supposed to flag this is a commander-only card.
Okay, so I had these two cards in my deck. I'd made it to the third round. I'm playing it. I'm going to win this game. Like, I'm going to win. I'm going to take all the prizes.
I'll bet these cards are designed for multiplayer formats. They're incredibly overpowered in one-on-one.
Yeah. So I play this card out, and he's like, wow, that's really powerful. And then he looks at it and says, this isn't legal. And until that moment, I didn't know. So without me telling you what actually happened, what do you think happened next, or what do you think should have happened next?
If I was your opponent, and this is not a competitive REL, I would have looked at you and been like, okay, dude, here's the situation that you find yourself in. First of all, my baseline assumption is you've lost this match. Period. End of discussion. You have lost the finals. I have beaten you. The only thing that you have to determine now is how good a person you are to tell the tournament organizer or to tell your past opponents that you beat them with cards that aren't legal. Maybe the discussion would have come in like, did you use these cards? Did you play these cards against those people?
So yes, all of that, everything you just said ran through my head, and we had a brief discussion. The guy's playing with real good stand-up guy. We're friends. I made it clear to him that I was conceding the match. I said, okay, obviously I presented an illegal deck. I just played an illegal card. You win. And he extended his hand and we shook. And that was it. And then we kind of sat there in silence while we were both pondering the rest of what you just said. but what are the implications? And I said, I think I have one other card that may have the same problem. And I pulled it out and we looked it up and it did as well. So it's those two cards that we said. And then I said, but you're the first person I played either of these against. And the rest of my deck is legal.
So yes, we're in a weird space now, right?
It is. It's a weird space.
Because technically, at any competitive REL, you would have been disqualified.
But it wasn't competitive REL.
I know it wasn't, yes. But any other at a normal competitive REL, right. You would have been disqualified before you even sat down at your first match. So that changes how the entire tournament would have flown. Like the opponents that you played against would have played against different people. The results would have been different, which would have fed into different results of the entire tournament. Who knows what could have happened? If I was you, this is the situation. Like you said, it's not competitive REL, so the tournament organizer doesn't care. You go to the store owner, he's going to throw his hands up like, I don't know what to do. I don't care. I'm here to make money off of you idiots sitting here buying my snacks. So if I was you, I think I would have... 50-50 chance I would have just gone home and not told anybody. The other 50% is I would have gone and been like, listen, I screwed up big time and I want to buy you like a pack, or I want to compensate you for my screw up. Like, let me buy you a soda or something because I really kind of screwed you over without realizing or intending to.
Who's you in that scenario that you just said?
The person, the opponents that I played previously in the tournament and beat. I would have found those two guys or ladies or whoever they were. That 9-year-old kid that cried after I beat him with my illegal deck. I would have been like, listen, I'm really sorry. Let me buy you a soda. Let me compensate you $5 for your... Oh, what was the entry fee? There's a great question. What was the entry fee to this thing?
Yeah, it was $20.
Oh, so you ruined their chances. Like, do you owe them $20? I don't know if you owe them $20. You might owe them $5 or $10, honestly.
Okay, so I'm sitting there and all this is going through my head, everything you're saying. First of all, I'm deeply embarrassed, like that because I wouldn't do this on purpose. I wouldn't show up with an illegal deck and hope that just no one noticed.
This is the worst.
So
part
I did
of the
it by
whole thing,
accident,
like, accidentally,
and then I just looked like an idiot.
You should know better. Like, you've been around how long? You're one of the magic boomers that people make fun of.
I know. I know. But the fact that I've been around so long is part of the reason this accident happened, is because everything's gotten so complex. There's so many cards to pick up. There's so many set symbols. They're similar to the other set symbols. My organization system failed me. A whole bunch of...
You just sound old. Well, I had everything organized by year, and if they hadn't put the illegal cards with the legal cards, everything would have been fine. Like, all right, thanks, Jebediah. We don't care.
Yeah, because that's not really how you're supposed to check the legality of a standard deck. You're just supposed to only put legal cards in your deck, and I didn't do that. But it was 2 cards. I didn't play them against any of the other 2 people I beat. So... ultimately, I decided to just accept the prizes. I got second place, and
just kept your mouth shut.
Yeah, I just kept my mouth shut. But I know who the 2 guys I beat were, and I like your idea, so I think I'm going to come clean with them later.
That's dude.
But I didn't play either of these cards against them. They were in my sideboard. I didn't even bring them in.
Honestly, that makes the decision making more complicated because, like, I beat them technically. With a legal deck. But also, technically, if we were at any other rule enforcement level, I wouldn't even sat down at the table. Okay.
Yeah.
This is why I'm going to make a pitch for you right now. You should be playing limited. You should just play limited when you sit down. If you don't have any cards.
You can't have these kinds of actions.
They hand you all of the cards that you're going to play with, and they say...
they're all legal.
Anything that you open, even if it's not legal in the format, it's legal for this tournament because that's how limited works.
Yeah. Well, kinda. Last week I was in one of the Ravnica Remastered, and they gave you, of course, the like promo card from the set. And they're like, this one can't go in your deck.
While we're talking about Bad and Magic, can I do a Bad and Magic for a second?
Yeah.
Okay. My local game store, I go there and I just play Commander. Like, that's it. Like, that's what we do. I roll in with my son. We pay $5 to sit at a table, and then we just play pickup games of Commander for a couple of hours, and we go home. Once a week, this is all we do, okay? Occasionally, very occasionally, they'll do like a pre-release. That's been the biggest ones. They'll do a pre-release sealed tournament, or they'll do... last week, they were going to do a draft. Ravnica Remastered was...
Yeah, Ravnica Remastered. So you played it too.
No, I didn't. They were going to do a draft for Ravnica Remastered, And they told me that. I was like, oh, hey, we're doing Ravnica Remastered next week. I'm like, that sounds fantastic. I would love to crack open a Dual Land. Ravnica was the set that I started with Magic. The OG original Ravnica was the first set that I was around for. Nice. And so I was stoked. I was looking forward to it all week. I was pumping up my son because he has never played Draft. He's only ever played Sealed. And I've always helped him. Like, I'd given him some tips like, okay, separate these from these. And then I would come in and I would actually build his deck at the end of it. He would sort everything. Here's my removal. Here's my rares. Here are my colors. And then I would build his deck for him in like 5 minutes and he would play with that. But he's never drafted before. And so, Ben, throughout the week, I was sending him, okay, read this article about the archetypes of the different guilds that are in Ravnica Remastered. Okay, watch this video about how to draft. Watch this video about how to draft Ravnica Remastered specifically. Like, I was priming him and trying to get him ready for this whole thing, right? He's like, can't you just...
So you'd invested a lot in this.
I was so looking forward to this. My local game store, like, they don't have start times for stuff. Like, oh, we'll start when everybody shows up. It's usually around, 6:30. However,
yeah, but that always means they start late.
Every single time I would roll in there, like for these pre-release events, I would make a real concerted effort to get. It's a half an hour from my house, so I've got to okay, we got to get the kids home from school, we got to get them fed, we've got I got to get out of here, and then we would be there at 6:15, and inevitably every single time we were waiting around until 7:15, 7:30 before things actually started firing off.
But you can understand why they do that, because once they establish a culture of starting everything late, then people show up late, and as a store owner, again, like you said, he's just trying to sell people snacks. He doesn't want people to show up and then we started on time, sorry, and 5 people don't get entered in.
So you're skipping ahead of my story, but this one, Ravnica Remastered, we were pumped. I'm like, and my wife goes, what time you guys got to be there? I'm like, it'll probably start around 7. We left my house at 6:15. We got there at 6:45. Okay, well, that's not all right. Let me be very specific. We got there at 6:50. In my mind, I was still 10 minutes early from what the projected start time should have been. I was expecting the start time to be 7. Fully intending it for it to not start until 7:15, 7:30. Okay?
Yeah.
We roll up at 6:50, and they've already got 2 pods drafting, and they're in their second pack. And I walk in, and me and my son, for Christmas, I bought my son a matching Bad at Magic hockey jersey.
You were 10 minutes early, and they were already 30 minutes into it?
We were 10 minutes early. We're wearing our matching Bad at Magic uniforms with all of our stuff. And we're halfway through the second pack. Do you want us to start over? And I the store owner started trying to stop the timer and put us into the thing. I'm like, no, stop. You can't. You're halfway through a draft. You can't insert somebody at this point. It's impossible. I know how a draft works. And so 50% of my brain was like, well, it's just not going to happen because they had a pot of 8 and a pot of 7. There's too many. It's not going to happen. You can't just form another pod, a late pod. There's not enough people for that. So I'm like, all right, well, one, it's not going to happen. The other part of my brain is really, guy? Really? You're going to start?
You're always late.
You're always late.
And today
you decided you're going to start early. So no, I was like, all right, well, I guess we're not playing. And I grabbed myself hey, seriously. I tried to be as cheery as I possibly could. Good luck, everybody. Have fun. Have a good time. Come on, kiddo. Let's go get some ice cream.
But inside you're seething.
Fun. I was indescribably irate, and I know I can't express any of this because I'm a grown man, and this is a kid's game that I was mad about, and it wasn't because this guy started early. That was 10% of the reason I was mad. 90% of the reason I was mad is because I had been building it up in my brain the whole week, and I didn't get to do the thing that I wanted to do that I had been looking forward to. That's why I was mad.
That's sad.
But the guy texted me. He called me. He left a voicemail. Him as the store owner, he was trying really hard to make it right, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But he's like, oh, hey, you guys, I feel really bad. You want to come back and I can give you some free product? Or we can do something else? Or do you want me to text you before stuff like this happens?
Of course, he doesn't want to lose you as a customer. And you're like his de facto judge as well.
But hang on. And this is the thing is as he's doing all these things, I'm like, one, yes, that's nice of him to do to try to make it right. But two, I'm not special enough for that, frankly. Yeah, de facto judge or whatever, that's aside. Okay, back when we met and I was still single and we were playing at Atomic Comics, I dropped $700 into that store every other month.
I get it. Yeah, you know how much more you could have been a bigger whale.
Well, and that's the thing. If Atomic Comics told me that, hey, I screwed up, let me make it right to you, I'd been like, right you're going to make it right for me. Like, you know how much money I spend in this place? I go to this LGS, and Ben, I spend I less than $100 a month on this guy. Like, I don't want him to feel this bad, and so I'm trying to again, I'm swallowing my emotions and trying to be like the responsible. Yeah. Don't be like, no, dude, it's your store. You run things the way that you wanted to. We were late. No big deal. No harm, no foul. It's on me. I didn't check what the time was. I'll be more diligent next time. Everything's fine. We're good. But at the same time, I'm texting that and I'm pressing the screen of my phone so hard that I'm afraid it's going to crack because of how mad I am about it. I don't.
I'm sorry that happened. So, are you over it yet?
Yeah, I'm over it. It just sucks because the LGS I go to is not in the best part of town. It's the closest one, but it's not the best part. And just like every other LGS, there's not people there that have the kind of disposable income that I have.
That's local game store.
Local game store, sorry. I know for a fact there is no chance of anyone ever wanting to do a draft of a premium product like this ever again. And so, like, I'm never going to have another opportunity to draft Ravnica Remastered in person. Unless I shell out the cash to buy the box and get people to sit down and play with me, which I'm not going to do, because if I bought the box, you don't get to get your greasy fingers all over my cards.
You said there were 15 people there drafting when you got there. Why wouldn't that happen again?
The normal crowd for just a regular Friday night is half of that. It's maybe like 7 to 8.
Then how did they get 15 people together?
Because whenever he does special events, there are people that come out of the woodwork that don't show up for just the random pickup commander games, but they'll show up for like the drafts.
That's
or for
such
the
a fascinating idea. It's like everything has this, even like roads. Like, there are people that don't drive, but then something happens and they're out there driving. You know, just where are these random people that show up on a Friday night to play a set that aren't normally there? Like, how do they find out what are they normally doing?
He does other things. Like, he does Catan tournaments. Like, he has recurring people that are constantly coming in there. It's not just Magic that he's doing. And I think there's a Venn diagram of
there's
people.
There's some crossovers.
Yeah. I play board games and I will play the premium Magic stuff, but I won't come to show up to play Commander.
I know. I didn't connect the dots here, so I'm going to kind of connect them. In Super Freakonomics, they talked about how in certain seasons of the year in Chicago, there's higher demand for prostitution. And so there's some prostitutes that aren't full-time prostitutes. They're only part-time prostitutes that will come out and turn tricks when the price goes up.
Yeah, exactly. When the economic incentive is there enough to make them change their behavior. Yeah, same thing with these Magic players. Oh, I show up and I play D&D, but every once in a while, there's a premium Magic game, and I'm rolling in for that too.
All right, Josh, where are you at in the Wheel of Time?
Ben. Like, this was, all right, it was important to me. I posted this on the Reddit. Not all of our listeners heard this. We recorded episode 115, and I was still reading book 5, The Fires of Heaven. And it irked me because I was so close to finishing it. And so before we published episode 115, I had finished book 5 and was into book 6, The Lord of Chaos. And it was so important to me to know that I am making better progress than it looks like I am, that I had to post that on the Reddit. I don't know who saw it or who cared. I am making good progress in this book.
I love how much pride you take in this.
I am.
You're speedrun it. This has got to be like the fastest you ever gone through it.
That's not true at all. No, when I was doing pools, you wouldn't believe
when you were doing pools.
At the amount. Yeah, listening to 6 hours of books a day, you'd be surprised at how fast you can get through a series of books.
Okay.
So I'm in book 6. I'm about a third of the way into book 6, The Lord of Chaos. This is one where people start complaining. Like, if you go online, people will say this is the book where it's the series.
The fans start complaining?
Well, yeah, the series starts to take a dip, and they're not wrong. Books like 6, 7, 8, and I want to say 9. There's this plot inertia, they call it. This is the agreed upon term of all the Wheel of Time fans, where for some reason things slow down, and for some reason the original author Robert Jordan feels like he doesn't want to progress the story past certain points, and so we get a lot of filler. And I mean, so here, to be clear, I have never complained. I have never been dissatisfied with the story and the pacing and the way that it goes. But I will say that the books where Brandon Sanderson takes over, you can feel the throttle go from 10 to 1,000. Like, the breakneck pace at which Brandon Sanderson is wrapping things up in the last 3 books is crazy in comparison to the pacing of the previous books. But again, at the same time, I'm still enjoying the crap out of them. I love learning more about my characters. The only other point that I'm going to make right now, because again, I'm trying to do, you have all these interesting things to say about the whole library of books that you're reading and the time it's taking me to get through the Wheel of Time. I want to add something to it too. There was a mistake in the recording that I was listening to. So I've noticed this a couple of times where every time, the way I work my library and my Audible is I have the library. It's in the cloud, right? I own these books. But I don't keep them on my phone. I don't keep my entire Audible library at my fingertips. That doesn't make sense. So after I've read a book, I'll delete it off my phone. And if I'm going to reread it later, I will re-download it. And I noticed every time I re-download things, it can be a little bit different. There's something different about the recordings.
Interesting.
This one, I got to the end of chapter 5. I got to the end of chapter 5 of this book, and it's clearly a mistake because it goes, this audiobook is continued on the backside of cassette 6. Please flip the cassette over at this time. And so I'm like, oh, well, they screwed that up. That's just bad editing. And then there's a pause for a second, and then it reset like the line previous to that, and then just kept going like nothing had happened, as you would expect. But then I got to thinking, how many cassettes? Hang on a second, cassette tapes? I mean, these have been around long enough to have been on cassette tapes, but my God, Ben, how many cassette tapes would it take?
If you were trying to read a Wheel of Time book on cassette tape, that'd be like 15 cassettes.
This book, okay, I'm listening to it at 120% speed. 120% speed, and this book is 38 hours long at 120% speed. I looked it up before we started recording. The maximum size cassette tape could take 60 minutes on a side. So that's 2 hours of content once you flipped it over. So what is, even at 120% speed, 38 hours on cassette. What is that, 16? No, it's more than that. It's like 19 cassette tapes.
Did you never check out an audiobook from the library that came in one of these clamshell cases where all the cassettes were indexed in these molded sections?
I have listened to audiobooks on CD, but I've never done it on cassette. I listened to Guns, Germs, and Steel.
That was lost in the 7 years between us.
Guns, Germs, and Steel I listened to on CD, and I had, I think, 4 or 5 CDs that I had to go through to listen to the whole thing. But I never thought about the absolute smorgasbord of cassette tapes that I would have to own in order to listen to the Wheel of Time on audio on cassette.
Those technologies have all just changed so fast. Even in that time when we went from cassette to CD, and then they realized they could compress it even further, and there was MP3s, and they made car audio CD players that could play MP3s, and then you could have fit all of it on a single CD.
Yeah, I had one of those. I made it a point. I was in high school, and we were getting a new stereo for my car. My dad points out, oh, let's get this one. I'm like, no, this one doesn't support MP3 CDs. It's a CD player. I'm like, you're not listening to me. There's MP3 CD, and then there's CD. There is, I can put a CD in and listen to 12 songs, or I can put a CD in and listen to 150 songs. That's the one I want.
Yeah. I had a book, I think it was suggested by Audible. It was called This Will Be Funny Later by Jenny Pentland. Okay. And I just saw that it was a memoir, and I thought I'd be interested in it. I must be really odd for some of these memoirs because some people probably look at who the author is, and it's some famous person, and they know and they read it because of that. I just read it because it looked like a memoir from somebody about my age that I thought I might be interested in, and I figured if it was good enough to be popular and get the good ratings it got, that I'd read it. So I just started reading it.
How do you find these? Let me I'm going to break up your conversation for a second. How do you, you're on Audible, you have a credit, you just go to their site and just wait for them to dish something up, or you go digging?
So I have a wish list that I put stuff on, and those are my good intentions. That's my I want to read bookshelf that I never get to, because whenever it comes time to pick another book, I look at the titles on the list again and go, not today. So I think this was an algorithm selection. It's seen that I tend to like and rate memoirs, and this is a recent release that was popular, and it put it on my list.
This was some bot going, you know what? This fits you. You're a weird guy. Yes. You'll like this one.
So I took the bot's advice. I downloaded this book, This Will Be Funny Later by Jenny Pentland, and I started reading it. And it come to find out that Jenny Pentland is the second daughter of Roseanne Barr.
Oh.
The famous comedian who had the show Roseanne back in the 90s.
Back in the day, yeah. Okay, that's weird. Okay, so what does Jenny Pentland have to say about This Will Be Funny Later?
She was famous for being a bit of a chaotic child, and Roseanne's brand of comedy was kind of having a chaotic lifestyle. You know, she had been married like 4 times, and one time it was another famous comedian and stuff. Anyway, her rise to fame was meteoric, to say the least, Roseanne's. Mm-hmm. And Jenny Pentland went from just being a kid in a normal lower middle class house where the parents didn't necessarily get along and stuff, to Roseanne made that her bread and butter for comedy that made her get seen and found, and then go on the Tonight Show and then get her own TV show and all of a sudden be making just tons of money. And all this fame came on her, and like her mother, she tended to struggle with her weight, and so there was a lot of guilt and shame and bullying that she had to endure as being the daughter of a famous celebrity. And she started to act out and be a bit chaotic, and then her mother used all the money to send her to initially like private schools, and then when she failed or got kicked out of those, send her to like reform schools and like these weird cult-like camps where you're virtually a prisoner, but because you're a minor child and your parents decided to send you there, they keep you there. And then she went and did like those wilderness survival courses where they take you out in the middle of nowhere where there's nowhere you can escape to, and you're with these counselors that are yelling at you like military training instructors. And so all of this is her childhood experience from like 13 to 18, where she's just acting crazy.
Was this
doing all
Okay, what's the draw? Like, did you enjoy listening to this?
So there was a lot of stuff I learned from this. One is like I never understood why those things existed. And her perspective on it, and I agree with it, is there's a segment of people out there that have money and chaotic children and want to throw money at the problem.
Okay.
And because of there's a supply and a demand, things rise up. And there's these pseudo-psychological schools of thought where they're saying, if we follow these steps, it will help reform your child. And the parents have the money and the people have the idea, and then they just take the money. There's no scientific proof that it works. There's no past history. There's just desperate parents with too much money.
Yay, capitalism.
She was virtually a prisoner for much of her childhood. As far as I can tell, she doesn't seem to hold any kind of long-lasting grudge against her parents. It was an interesting read. It was an interesting insight to the life of a teenage girl, and kind of learn about one of the celebrities I grew up with from a really odd perspective.
Okay, I have weird feelings about this thing. Does this person deserve to have a published memoir? Like, is their life interesting enough? And then, okay, a thought just occurred to me, and I immediately retract everything I just said, because we're 2 middle-class, well-to-do white guys that have a podcast. What right do we have to have any kind of platform to say the kind of stuff that we say? So, retracted. Jenny Pentland, feel free. Like, put your stuff into the world, and if people want to consume it, they can.
Yeah, and I think it's selling well, and she's getting interviews. Again, like I've said about reading nonfiction, I was like, wow, I don't remember that. And I'd go look it up, and there it was. You know, her on the cover of the Inquirer magazine, or her mother, you know, getting caught with her third guy before she divorced the second one, or whatever. Just all those things that happened or are out there. So I found interviews of her and clips of her and things like that, and it was just an interesting peek. If you're into memoirs, this one's fine.
I'm not, but I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I read another book. So I'd mentioned on episode 115 of the Bad at Magic podcast I was experiencing a little bit of writer's block, and one of our listeners is a writer, and he sent me a message on social media suggesting a title that he thought would be helpful called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. Stephen Pressfield's the author of a book called The Legend of Bagger Vance. He also is a screenwriter. He's very experienced in the area of creative writing and deadlines, and had some good advice for people who might be experiencing writer's block.
Okay.
The book that he suggested was only like 116 pages or something like that. It was only like a 2.5 hour read. I was like, I could do this. So I picked it up and read it in an afternoon. Good news, bad news. Bad news, it's full of like this really weird mysticism that I haven't experienced anywhere else, and I didn't really enjoy.
Really? Hang on. You experienced some weird mysticism in your life, and it like threw you off? You, the devout LDS like person, experienced some weird mysticism, and that like You couldn't get over that, and that like colored your thoughts about the person that was giving you that information? How strange and weird. What a unique experience that must be.
I'm not going to let that straw man stand. It wasn't like, oh, because this guy believes differently than me, he couldn't possibly have any good ideas. That wasn't what happened. Okay. I went into this with an open mind thinking like, this is a successfully published author. Maybe he has some things that can help me.
So what's the weird mysticism angle? Why even bring it up? It broke your threshold of not only noticing it, but you wanted to talk about it. So why? Yes. What made it weird?
Because it went out of the realm into being like something I could act usefully on to just being like almost like witchcraft. It wasn't helpful. However,
I want you. Hang on. No. We're not putting that aside just yet because I want to use this as a learning tool. That feeling that you're feeling, this weird witchcraft mysticism nonsense. How could that possibly help me, Ben? That's how I feel every time you and I talk to each other. Okay, I want you to take that and try to build that into your filter or into your Josh simulator from now on. Okay.
Okay.
Listeners,
I didn't want to move on too fast because I want to make it seem like I'm marinating in it. In reality, that only takes a moment to assimilate that knowledge. Okay, I got it.
The facial expressions that this man made to me on this video call, I can't describe. Okay, that's the one side of this double-bladed sword. What was the good portion of it?
Well, then I think doing that first set up the next point, which is he had some really valid ideas that were helpful. And reading that book, immediately after I put it down, I picked up my writing and I knocked out the task that I'd been struggling with for a long time, and it really helped.
Oh, okay. Was it just because of a burst of motivation from having read something like this, or did you internalize or actualize some of the suggestions that were in the book?
A little of both.
Okay.
One of the main ideas he has, he refers to the inability to break through tasks like these as resistance. And he talked about the sources of resistance, the cause of resistance, and ways to overcome it. And resistance, he basically says, is just... he gave all the reasons that you get writer's block. But he says the main thing about resistance, I think this is what helped me the most, is something that you feel like is hard to do but you really want to do is because it's important to you.
Okay.
And I thought, yeah, like if it was something I just didn't care about, I wouldn't be thinking about it and I wouldn't be coming back to it and I wouldn't be trying to do it. He also talked about how it's this never-ending battle, and he described the author's dilemma. How like one day you'll get up and you'll get past all the distractions and you'll get past and you'll start writing and you might not write something good, but you finally do it, and then at the end of the day you've done something. But the next day you get up and you got to do it all over again because it comes back the next day.
There's a quote from the Civil War comics with Tony Stark, and he's like, Spider-Man was giving him crap like, you haven't even finished this one yet. And then Tony Stark says, art is never finished, only abandoned.
Yeah, definitely like that. And that was what I was feeling with this particular thing I was working on. But I made a lot of progress, and I appreciate our listener for recommending The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. Josh, you played a new game. I want to hear about it. So you sent me some photos of you and your family playing a game called Fire Tower. How does that work?
Fire Tower. So my son recently got a bunch of money in an Amazon gift card, and he wanted to spend this money. I'm not going to go down this thought process that a 12-year-old has of, I have $100, what do I spend it on? Because it really feels a lot like when you gave your kids $20 and said, go get lunch, and they bought exactly $20 worth of food. That's what happened with my son.
Yeah.
That's enough said there. He wanted to buy a game. And so he was looking online. He's like, oh, look at this. I want to buy Axis and Allies. It's $120. Can you give me $20? And I sat down with him, and I don't know.
I love that game.
I have very fond memories of that game, Ben. That game I have fond memories of playing 4 people at a table for 13 straight hours. That game
never ends.
That is... It's everything. It's the antithesis of my article about how to introduce board games to people that aren't board game people.
Oh, yeah. Long turn length, interminable decisions, complex rules.
Multiple hour turn lengths. You're like when it's my turn, I'm going to be doing stuff for 45 minutes, and you might as well go get a pizza because it's not even going to involve you.
Yeah.
Fun game, awesome game. Like if you're into World War II and you're a kind of person that can sit down and get enjoyment watching somebody strategize how to exactly implement the Pearl Harbor attack, then sure, sit down and play Axis and Allies. I looked my son in the eye and said, son, you're going to spend $120 on a game that you will never in your life convince anyone in this house to sit down and play with you. And so that was just, you could see his face melt a little bit. Like, I'm not being very kind, but I'm being
you were sufficiently
honest.
Dissuasive.
Yes, I'm trying to be dissuasive. But then he saw another game, and I don't know if it was just in the feed or if it was a sponsored ad that came up, but it was for Fire Tower. And he goes, what about this game? And I'm like, okay. Again, I know about this game. I've never played it, but it's been in my periphery. I don't know if it's bots or whatever, but I had seen enough content about this game to know this is probably something that he'd be okay with. Interesting, quick. Like even on the box, it says the game is going to last 15 to 30 minutes. Perfect for young kids. It's like, yeah, that would probably be fine. And so he bought that one. This game is, there's a board and it's a forest. At the corners of this board are towers, like the watchtowers that you see in National Forest.
Okay, so fire tower, like somewhere in a forest service where you're looking for fires so you can put them out before they become giant forest fires.
Exactly. The dead center of this board, the 4 squares, it's called the Everflame. This is the part of the forest that is on fire that cannot be put out. This is a forest fire game. And the idea is that you have cards, and you play these cards, they have different actions, and the intent is that the other fire towers burn down before your fire tower burns down. And it's kind of...
So is it player versus player or players versus game?
It's very much player versus player, because the winner is not like, oh, can we work together to put out the fire? It's who's the last man standing in this fire.
That's really weird, because I get that that the hook is that you're forest rangers trying to put out a forest fire, but the fact that you want your competitors to die seems like a flavor violation.
Oh, in the instructions, it's very clear. They don't die. Their fire tower burns down, and they can no longer coordinate the actions of the firefighting people. And so they don't die. They just are pushed out of the forest.
Okay. All right. So how's the gameplay?
What's cool about this is they have these like fire tokens, and they're like, I don't know, they're like jagged little gems that are orange and look like fire, and you put them on the board as the fire spreads. There is a wind indicator that shows which direction the wind is going. And at the beginning of every turn, you have to put one fire token onto the board in the direction that the wind is blowing. And so wherever there is fire, you can spread the fire 1 square in the direction that the wind is blowing at the beginning of every turn. Then you have your cards. You have wind cards where you can deliberately change the direction of the wind to a different direction. You have water cards where here is a pattern. Like, oh, this is like an airdrop. It's like a plane flying over and dropping water on the fire. So you get to remove fire tokens in this pattern anywhere on the board. Or there's fire tokens where the fire is spreading in this specific way, and you get to put that pattern of fire tokens onto the board. There's also fire breaks where it's like, I'm going to put a little purple token on the board, and fire can never be in this spot ever again because we deforested it or put a ditch or something or whatever. And so the idea is that it's this back and forth of offense versus defense. It's like, oh, the wind is blowing towards my opponent, so I'm going to use my fire cards. I'm going to try to keep pressing the fire closer to my opponents. And then they'll play cards to switch the wind back towards you. And like, oh crap, I need to be defensive. Like, no, I'm putting out the fires that's close to me. I'm changing the wind back to them. And so it is very fast turn lengths. It's very engaging. It's pretty quick and easy to pick up. Honestly, Ben, not going to lie, this is right there. This is a peer to Ticket to Ride. If I'm going to sit down with people that have never played a board game before, like a more intense board game than like Monopoly, this is now on that list. Like, you've never played a hardcore board game, it's going to be Ticket to Ride or it's going to be Fire Tower. And you're going to have a good time, and it's going to be fun, and you're going to enjoy it.
Okay. Wow, that's a pretty good recommendation here from the Bad Magic Podcast. I think I might give Fire Tower a try.
The biggest thing about it is the turn lengths. Man, that game is quick. Like, it went from, at the very beginning, I felt like, oh, this is going to take forever, to, holy crap, everything is on fire. And it took like 3 turns. And like in my at the beginning, like I almost completely burned down both my wife and my daughter's tower, and I realized they're not going to have fun if I just kick them out of the game real quick. And so I shifted my attention to my son. But I had already upset my wife, and then my wife decided, oh no, that's not going to stand. And so 2 turns later, my tower was on fire and I was out of the game. In the next turn, like 1 round around the table, she had eliminated my daughter from the game. And then in another round of turns, she had eliminated my son from the game. And so, like I said, it goes from nothing to everything is burning down very, very quickly.
I want to key in on something you said for a moment. It's at the heart of a lot of my gaming experiences. Some of my gaming experiences I'm having are just for me. Like when I play Magic the Gathering, I want to win. Like that's why I don't play Commander, because Commander's kind of a group experience. When I'm playing in a tournament for myself, I want to win every round. I don't want to lose any rounds. I don't want to lose any games. I don't have any opponents where I'm thinking, this guy might have more fun if I throw the game and let him win this round. No, I want to win every single time. If you're playing a 4-player Commander game and it's casual and there's no stakes on the line, and you have, first of all, you might not put cards into your deck that would make it unfun for those other people.
Right.
And second of all, if you do, you'd pick other people that want to do that. But you wouldn't. You might think, oh, I'm about to beat that guy, but I want to keep him around because then he'll just be out and not have any fun. So I'm not going to beat that guy.
That's the level of Commander that's different than any other format in Magic. Is there's politicking that happens, and you can make friends or make enemies. And my son is terrible at this because he will be in the middle of a Commander game and look at somebody at the table and go, "Secret alliance? Do you want to form a secret alliance where we're working together?" I'm like, it's not very secret. I can hear you talking. But I define the win conditions of Commander differently than you do. If I get to do my thing, if my deck gets to pop off, even if I don't win, if I get to do my thing, I'm happy. I don't care if I win or not.
Yes, and that's what I was getting at is, there's a difference between I want to be victorious in this game versus I have kind of this other objective of everyone in the group having a good time.
Yeah, okay.
And you were talking about that as your criteria. Like, well, I could see that what the actions I was about to take was going to make my daughter and my wife have less good time. And to you, the consequences of that is, 1, they didn't enjoy this game, and 2, they're less likely to agree to play a game with me next time. And you have to protect both of those things.
Yes, I needed to. But at the beginning, it wasn't that way. At the beginning, it was the objective of the game is to burn down the other towers. I'm going to go about that the most efficient way possible. And I've played a lot of games. I know how this works. That's when I was doing too well, and I had to rein it back. I had to stop. Like the other guy in my head from the Inside Out version was like, hey, hang on a second. Let's think about our secondary objectives in that we want to play this again someday in the future. And
right.
So that's when that it overrode the me winning is not necessarily the winning end state for this game.
I had that experience with you once, Josh.
Oh, tell me.
So when we founded the Bad at Magic podcast back in the summer of 2018,
it's been a minute.
Or 19,
yeah,
we went together and played games all weekend at one of your friends' houses in Dallas.
Yes, I remember.
And
that.
one of the guys says, "I got this idea for a game. Let's pull out Captain Sonar."
Oh,
We've
God.
talked about Captain Sonar on the podcast. The reaction you had just now is right. I want you to connect it to what we were just talking about.
Okay.
I had a blast playing that game. It was one of the most unique gaming experience I've ever had, and it was so much fun. And you had such a bad experience at it that you would never agree to play it again.
Yes, and I will agree that it is the most unique gaming experience I've ever had, but it was not enjoyable at all because of a handful of personalities of the people that I was playing it with.
Would you be willing to try it again with a different group of people?
I think so. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Because I don't know if my team was just different than your team, but man, it was great. I really enjoyed it.
I can see you taking Captain Sonar and playing that in your house with your family and having a blast. I can, in the same token, I can see myself in that scenario and having a blast. Again, there were specific things that were happening that made me not have a good time that day.
Got it. Okay. But yes, that gets to what you're saying. If you only ever play a game to win, you're going to violate some of those secondary and tertiary objectives, which are, I want to have fun, but I want the other people to have fun too, because we have a long-term relationship we got to maintain.
Exactly.
That leads us to Bad at Italian. This is going to relate to this and the main segment that we're going to talk about. There's an Italian idiom that goes like this: Morto un papa, se ne fa un altro. It's a saying that means, when the Pope dies, they make another. It's a beautiful little turn of phrase because they say it in really interesting circumstances. Like if you were to be mad that you lost a board game, or spill your drink. If you spill your drink, you'd be like, "Oh, I spilled my drink," and they might say, "Morto and papa se ne fa un altro."
Life goes on.
Which means,
c'est la vie.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah, exactly. When the Pope dies, they make another. And I love that they relate it all the way to the most important thing in that whole country.
Arguably one of the most important people on the planet Earth. Yes, that's
right.
That's perfect.
And yet it's still like, yeah, if the Pope dies, they make another.
That feels very Italian. That feels very like, meh, whatever.
Exactly. Everyone's replaceable. Nothing's permanent. Life goes on. Don't cry over spilt milk.
I like that. I'm going to try to keep that in mind. Like, just bring whatever you think the importance is, like, dial it back 20%.
Yeah. Morto un papa se ne fa un altro. For our main segment today, Josh, I mentioned last time that I want to talk about something that we've never fully discussed in detail on my podcast. It's an idea I think I developed with you that I turned into a research paper that I did at one of the military schools I was at. So I went to something that was called Joint Professional Military Education Level 2 in Norfolk, Virginia. It was the same time that we went to that gaming conference. I was there for 10 weeks, and you're like, hey, some friends are getting together to play some games this weekend. Do you want to come? I'm like, I'm just in Virginia. I got nothing going on. I'll come. Tickets to Dallas are cheap. I flew to Dallas, and we had the thing happen in the airport and founded the podcast. That was a fateful week. While I was there, they said, all right, you need to get together with a group of your peers and write a research paper. So some of you come up with ideas and some of you get together with other people and write research papers. So me and a guy in the Marine Corps and a guy in the Army got together, and wrote a paper about what I like to call the fundamental manpower paradigm in the military.
I hate
it sounds a bit
projects.
dense.
I hate group projects. Like, how can you take a complex idea and break it down as a writing assignment to multiple people?
You can't. That's why I came up with the topic, because I didn't want to try to support someone else's topic. I wanted people to support my topic, and they weren't fully on board ever, I think. But we came up with something.
You definitely seem like the kind of guy to be like, hey, guys, let's do this. It'll be fantastic. Here's your portion. All you got to do is this. And then be like, okay.
Yeah, that's kind of how it went. What we wrote was almost publishable. What we were supposed to do is write something with the intent that it would get published in a professional journal.
Okay.
It's available. Link in the show notes if you want to read it. It's kind of dense because it has a bunch of legal language and stuff. I'm just going to give you the wave tops. Here's the idea. When you're trying to accomplish an objective and you have manpower to help you accomplish the objective, there's a continuum. On this continuum, there's two ends of the scale. That is, of the objective I'm trying to accomplish with the people available to me, are the people replaceable or not? As in, does every member of my team, do they have specific skill set and knowledge that is hard won and fought, requires a lot of education, a lot of training, and if I lose that person, I can't accomplish the mission? Or at the all the way other end of the spectrum is my objective so easy to accomplish that you could just give me any random person, I could insert them into this team and we could still accomplish the objective?
Okay. Yes. How hard? Like, you decided to pick one variable, put that on an axis, and then figure out where the military lies and why it lies where it does on that axis. In this case, the axis being the replaceability of any single individual.
You nailed it. So looking at the problems that we're experiencing today in our organization, our training, our ability to accomplish our objectives through the lens of how, when we make a decision, what is our assumption about the replaceability of any given individual?
Gotcha. And just from that, and I don't know. All right, so I was hired at my job to do a lot of these process, like, revamp kind of things. And one of the things that I've been harping on them is you are leaning too hard on individuals. And that maybe I'm leaning too far on the other side of that spectrum because of my time in the military, but we had to build the processes. Like, my guys, I had a team of people to do this mission, but they could deploy. They were on PCS schedules, permanent change of station schedules. They were going to move and go somewhere else forever. I was going to get new people that I have no idea how much experience they even have in this career field. And so it was on me as the person representing the organization to create the processes in such a way that it didn't matter how much that this person knew. The mission had to get accomplished anyway.
And organizations want to be able to do this. They want to be able to turn their manpower into something fungible. Just insert random person here. They can execute a checklist. They can be given a minimal amount of training. They can follow simple instructions, and we can carry on with the job. If you were to take all of the career fields in any organization, but we'll say the military in this case, and kind of line them up by the amount of training and education that's required, you'll know that there's a sloped line. Like at the high end, you've got your doctors and your lawyers that had to go, to dozens of years of school and training and education and certification to become professionals. And at the low end, there's just like random schlub teach them how to reload a gun and point it at the bad guy and charge forward.
That's really interesting because in my organization right now, I'm trying to flatten that. I don't want there to be a curve. I want to define the positions that we need. And as long as the candidate or the person that's going to fill that position can check these boxes before they show up, then it doesn't matter who that person is. But then
right.
it's not flattening that curve. I guess it's just shifting that curve onto the onus of the individual. Me, as the organization, I don't care how much training I have to give a person if I can assume that they come in with certain skills and education previously attained.
So there's always some inefficiencies, but how much would you say the Air Force invested in you in terms of pure training to turn you from a cyberspace operations officer into a drone pilot?
Oh, geez. So what's
just
really...
in, like months of training.
I will tell you this right now, Ben. Being a comm officer was way more difficult on a day-to-day decision-making, critical thinking basis than it was to be a pilot. However,
but it had way less training.
It had way less training. I went to 6 weeks, maybe, of basic comm school, and even that was all technical. I was just complaining about this the other day. I think
that's a factor of the risk involved. You were going to be flying an airframe over friendly and enemy territory with live ordnance on board.
But at the same time, like as the comm officer training, they were trying to teach me how to make decisions. Like, how do we optimize the situation? What are the resources that you have to work with to achieve this objective? In the pilot training, which was, yes, it was much longer. I went to training for almost a full year on and off before they let me sit behind a plane and fly an operational mission. And even then I had oversight. But I had no decision-making capacity. All it was implementing and executing exactly these rules in exactly this defined way.
Yeah,
it's hard to describe.
But how many months did they require in order for you would actually fly in a mission by yourself?
Yeah, no, that was, like I said, almost a full year of training. Like there was breaks in the different types of training, but I was gone for a whole year before I got to fly.
And our comm officer training was only like 6 weeks.
Tops, and even that, and that was a joke. I took a test on Vietnam era radio antennas. Who cares?
Yeah. Okay, so. And you could see that with a modern pilot, that flying an airliner or something like that. It's going to take 3 to 4 years from scratch till they're actually flying solo or, commanding an aircraft.
Right. Absolutely.
So we've always kind of understood this. So let's go back to World War II. If you're in World War II and you need an infantryman to charge as part of a platoon on the ground, or if you need a pilot to fly a bomber, there's a different thought process that's happening here.
Yeah, those are two different... Well, they're not two different people necessarily. They could be the same person, but the amount of front-loaded education you give them changes.
Right. So on the low end of the replaceability continuum, you've got somebody that can just execute a checklist. You might rapidly rotate them through a position. It's resilient to attrition. As in, if you lose somebody, you just put somebody else in and you carry on. You make decisions based on a buzzword that we use in the military that's called the needs of the service, which is, I don't worry so much about what that person knows or what they're good at. Here's what I need that person to do right now.
Yeah, so it's the expectations or the requirements for the person coming in are lower and lower and lower at that end of the spectrum.
Yes. You just need to be able to meet minimum standards. But it also allows you to be rapidly scalable. I can go from no one to a full division, thousands and thousands of people. There will be high turnover and individual competence is needed, but basically everyone just achieve your objective. I'll never forget this scene from the movie Enemy at the Gates, where the Soviet army's getting ready to defend Leningrad against Hitler's army, and they don't have enough guns, and they're sending people into battle with every other person gets a gun, and they're saying to them as they go, when the person with the gun dies, pick up their rifle and continue the fight. And they were supposed to go fight the Nazi army without a gun.
Yep. That was like, you didn't need training. Just go fight. Just do your best. We have more of you than they have bullets. That's how we're going to win this.
Right. And that's the ugly far side of the replaceability continuum. We used to fight attrition-based warfare where we would determine our objective in terms of acceptable losses.
Ooh, that's not a word you hear anymore.
We don't use that term anymore.
We're not allowed to, no.
We want this objective so bad we're willing to take 10% losses. So this plan that we're presenting you means that, 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10 people will die while we're doing it, and we consider that to be success.
You think of that in terms of World War II, and that seems incredibly optimistic. Like, there has to have been
10% acceptable losses.
There has to have been operations with 60 to 70% acceptable losses guaranteed.
But it almost had to be that way. Technology was low. You were fighting with conscripts. There were these pockets of expertise, but you had to grow so massively. What you were doing was so new, and you needed so many people in such a short period of time. That was really your only option, or fail and lose, which wasn't acceptable.
Yeah, we live in a different world nowadays. Like, that's not a thing that you can say. You can't. The president of the United States can't give a press conference like, we are going to go fight this undeniable evil, and we're going to have 30% losses, and I'm reinstituting the draft. 3 out of every 10 of you is going to die. That's not something that you can say.
And I'm sure they never said those two things in that close of proximity to each other. Talk about drafting and acceptable losses in the same sentence. I mean, they had propaganda back then too, but yes.
That's like Prince Farquaad in the Shrek movie. Like, some of you may die, but that is a risk that I am willing to accept.
I'm willing to take, yeah. or Yzma in Emperor's New Groove. Let us out of the closet and we'll burn your house to the ground. So we recognize this was a problem, but in the post-World War II era, once totalitarian fascism had been defeated and we were starting to turn our mind to communism, we needed to transition to something else, because this end of the spectrum worked when you were fighting that type of conflict where you could just throw bodies at a problem because enough people agreed that they were willing to let people die, that was going to be our strategy, and that wasn't acceptable anymore. We started to have these proxy wars in Southeast Asia, and we transitioned to a less attrition-oriented type of combat, and technology changed. We invented nuclear weapons. We invented high-altitude bombers. We invented radar, all these kinds of things. And so we transitioned in 1973 through an act of Congress to an all-volunteer force. So the average age of the troops increased. There was more married and people with families. The level of education that people had was higher, and we started to move farther to the right on the spectrum, on the continuum of replaceability.
So did the service change? Did the requirements of the positions change? Or did just the people in the service and their perspective change?
Both and neither. That's the problem. That's kind of what the paper is about, is while we were making these moves for some reasons, there was institutional mechanisms that existed that didn't transform with this change.
Okay.
We were like,
the way that
we don't want to draft people anymore.
Yeah, the way that we train, equip, and organize was probably still built around this old school mentality of we're always going to have enough bodies, so we just need to be able to push them through the system.
But then we changed the way we got the bodies and the kind of bodies we got, and our tolerance for throwing them at problems. So we still had this old training and fighting doctrine and mechanism, but we had this new way of recruiting and retaining, and they were starting to have this tension. So in the high end of it, in the unreplaceable end of the continuum, you hire for positions. Like, you get the right person for the job that you need. You encourage innovation. You want people to become experts in their jobs and then stay in them for a long period of time.
We don't.
The military
we don't,
wasn't.
No, we don't do any of that. We
don't do any of that.
No, hire for position, please. You're like 3 years. It doesn't matter. You've been here too long. You're going somewhere else. We don't care. There's positions for you somewhere, maybe, and like it doesn't matter what your experience is. It doesn't matter what your expertise is in. You're going to go fill the same.
Kinda.
You're going to fill the same specialty code.
If I've spent 3 years teaching you to be a B-52 pilot and I don't have enough F-16 pilots, I'm not just going to take you out of the B-52 cockpit and put you in the F-16 cockpit.
You say that, but they took a ton of people out of the manned like fighter path and shifted them into drones without their consent. So one, that does happen, and two, arguably those paths are just the long treated, like they never changed jobs. Like, oh, you're going to be a B-52 pilot, and they just you're going to be in training for the next 3 years. It's not that they kept moving to different places and like changing specialties. They were still in the same pipeline. It just portions of it were geographically in different places.
Okay, I like that you use the word pipeline. That's a good word because that's one of the relics of the past that stuck around. And that is the idea that in order to get a senior officer, a senior technician, a senior experienced person, the only way to get that is to grow them from scratch from the very beginning.
Yeah, there's no way you can... there's no way the military is going to go out and hire a C-suite executive to be a wing commander somewhere. That's just not a thing that's going to happen.
Or they're going to go out and pick somebody that spent a lifetime learning to fly 747s in the private sector and then bring them in and have them be a senior level pilot in the Air Force. However,
they would probably benefit a lot from that.
Yes. And we do that with some career fields because we had to. You know what they are?
Technology? I'm guessing comm is one of them.
Professionals.
Okay. Lawyers and doctors.
Lawyers and doctors. Like, we needed mid-level lawyers and doctors, and they're not going to come in as second lieutenants and work their way all the way up to lieutenant colonel, especially because we can't get them because their salaries on the outside are so good. So they bring them in as lieutenant colonels.
Nice. Entry-level position, lots of authority. You have no background in understanding the military whatsoever. Here's a paycheck that's comparable to what you would get with your seniority on the outside. But you have way more authority and power than you probably should at this point in your career.
So here's the problem. From about 1973, when we professionalized the force, to the mid-'80s, things were starting to become more technical. And the way that we operated, because it was less attrition-oriented, became more about your ability to be technically proficient. Can you operate your weapon system in a way that exceeds the capability of the enemy? And that just that required us to be less replaceable oriented in our training, in our retention, in our rotations, in our building of the force. And we needed more to match people to the job and reward individual excellence and innovation, rather than, hey, you need to be able to execute this checklist and move on if I tell you to go do something else.
You might be mixing some apples and oranges in this fruit basket you're making, because there are still some parts of the organization of the military as a whole that is fungible. An infantry rifleman in the Army is never going to be a hire for position type of job. But at the same time, it has the number of technical has the requirement for technical expertise or formal education increased with the amount of technology that's working its way into the military? The answer is probably yes. I don't know. So what's the solution here? What's the outcome?
So it is that we need to identify these relics that still exist in the organization that prevent us from becoming less replaceable and weed them out. For instance, I found one in an article. It was about the United States Marine Corps. They've always prided themselves on being very resistant to societal change. And they have a saying in the Marine Corps that goes, every Marine a rifleman.
Yes.
And they don't just say it, they mean it.
Yeah, if you're going to join the Marines and you're going to be a fighter pilot, you're going to be an artilleryman, if you're going to be a guy that drives the boat from the big boat to the beach, every one of them goes through the same basic rifle training that every other Marine goes through.
Yes. And it's not just initial training, it's continuing training. And it comes at a cost. a significant cost, because you need people to be experts in the areas that you need them to be experts in for the organization. But if you're still levying on them this initial and recurring training bill in order to maintain their expertise as a rifleman, you have to consider, am I willing to pay that cost to the organization?
I've heard Marines talk about this, and there was a pilot that was specifically like, I am better armed as a close air support pilot for Marine Corps because I know more about what the guys on the ground go through. That makes me better at my job. So they might be writing that check based on intangibles.
Okay, and they'll continue. There's a lot of self-interest in preserving their culture. Like the Marine Corps is in danger. They have to continually protect their culture. However, I found an article in the Marine Times called "Every Marine a Rifleman No More."
Okay.
And it was about exactly this problem, that as warfare has become more asymmetric, as our societal values have changed, as technology has gotten more complex, we don't have the luxury of continuing to have every Marine be an expert rifleman if we're going to be relevant and be a threat to the bad guys.
Interesting. Okay. Huh.
So they were starting to propose changes to all of the other stuff, the way we train and the way we organize, that basically reclaims some of that time and uses it for more important things. Like, I'm going to have a Marine Corps officer who's a cyberspace operator, and I'd rather that he spend some of that time he was spending getting good at shooting and spend it on being better at being a cyberspace operator.
Okay. Okay,
Link to the reference in my paper.
Fair enough. So does your paper just discuss this problem in general, that these antiquated or carry on or legacy policies are creating probably a negative impact on a force that is more modern and more technical, because society is that way? Do you have any solutions, or is there any course of action that you recommend for that?
One is exactly like we were talking about. Like you said, we could probably benefit from recruiting mid-career professionals directly in at mid-ranks, instead of staying doggedly to our assumption that you can only grow someone from scratch. You can only ever get a general if he started as a lieutenant. You can only ever get a master sergeant if he started as an airman.
Okay.
Switch gears a little bit to where this could potentially lead in the future. I think Orson Scott Card imagined this really well in the book Ender's Game. You've read Ender's Game?
I have. Yeah. If you're a nerd, if you're listening to this podcast, you haven't read Ender's Game, stop. Stop listening to this podcast and go read Ender's Game.
Okay. So the idea in Ender's Game, to strip away all the trappings of it, is that at some point in the future, could it become that our weapons are so high tech that our ability to defeat an enemy is simply all comes down to the irreplaceability of a single person? This Orson Scott Card imagined the replaceability continuum slid all the way to the far end. Could our entire civilization hinge on the irreplaceability of one person?
That's an interesting point. Yeah. I would like to think that in a society that advanced, we've gone beyond the need for professional, people that break stuff and kill other people. But that's probably just me being a hippie. I can see that.
But the idea is that maybe our weapons could become so high tech and so automated that you just need someone who's skilled and knowledgeable and proficient and irreplaceable operating them.
There's a Star Trek episode that you're calling to mind where Star Trek Voyager, I think, came across this war between two opposing artificially intelligent robot species that were fighting. And both sides were saying, oh, we are the weapons that were built by this other society that was fighting this other society. And then by the end of the episode, you realize that the organisms, the biological beings that had created these weapons to fight their wars by proxy, had been dead for thousands and thousands of years, but their weapons lingered and were still fighting each other.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's a horrific outcome potentially of this.
Also, here's another complete tangent that's just kind of related but not. One thing that we're not talking about, you're talking about people in the military and the staffing and the funding and just how we get bodies in this military because it's such a necessity. One of the things we haven't talked about is the fact that the U.S. spends, like, I can't even quantify it.
It's the world's largest employer. The United States Department of Defense, the U.S. defense budget, I think, is as much as like the next 5 countries combined.
It's more than that. It's like the next 10 countries combined or something. The amount of money that we have on military spending in the United States is beyond understanding when it comes to the idea of need. There is no need to be spending the amount of money that we do on the Department of Defense. And I think that might just be a lingering result of like World War II. This idea that we are a superpower and that we plussed up this giant capacity and then just never drilled it back down because there's too many misaligned incentives to downscale or downsize our Department of Defense.
Yeah, and I think you can kind of reverse engineer the solution when you look at some of these things like Ever Marine or Rifleman and look at what's the opposite of that. Because if we say, like one of the ones I'd mentioned before is the needs of the Air Force, which is, I don't care what you're good at or what you like or what you want to do, here's what I need you to do right now. Well, what if instead of that we said, what are you good at? What do you want to do? And let you do that.
And you know what? This might go back towards each other because we are the government that spends 10 times more than the next guy on military spending. It's an idea there's always going to be bodies, so it doesn't matter what any individual cares about. I can always replace you. There's infinite resources for me to work with. If tomorrow the U.S. military spending budget was cut in half, you'd bet that there's going to be some hard decisions on like, all right, who do we keep? Who's good? Who cares? Who has education in the things that they're good at? I don't know. It feels like there would be, if the spending was way tighter, there would be more of an incentive on the organization to make sure that they were optimizing for not just the position, but the person that was sitting in that position.
I feel like you just answered the question that I asked in the thesis of my paper.
Oh, what's the problem?
Why does this persist? It's because of abundance of resources.
Yeah.
We haven't had to fix the problem.
Yeah. There's no
We haven't
reason.
had to become more efficient.
Yeah. I've said this on this podcast. The U.S. government is effective, not efficient. They don't have any incentive. They have any drive to be efficient because they have what is essentially
occasionally do, but
budget.
it's small scale and isolated. Like there's been budget cuts where, like specifically in like the end of the Reagan era, the post first Gulf War, there was a huge cut in the military and a lot of changes and stuff. But it wasn't on the scale of you're talking about. It wasn't 50%.
Right. When we're talking about the cuts that impacted us, we're talking about programs and projects. We're talking like an airframe getting retired, or we're talking about a research and development pipe that goes away. Like, we were going to get this next gen fighter, but the budget got cut. It's never been to the point where, the budget's getting cut, so the commander of this squadron has to send half of his troops home unemployed by the end of the week. That has never happened.
Yeah. Wow. And it wouldn't just be, it wouldn't happen like that. It would be, let's close half of our bases.
But what do you do with the people? Like just everybody at the base, you're just the entire function of this base is no longer a requirement. So all of you are now let go.
Yeah. Then we would be like, well, okay, so we're gonna consolidate this mission from this 3 bases at this one base. So let's get the best people from those 3 bases and bring them all to that one base.
I don't even think we have the mechanism to do that, because in all the drawdowns we've ever seen, it always happens in 2 waves. It's always, hey, we're cutting back on this specific career field, on this specific year group. We need volunteers. If you want to get out, you can get out right now, get out of jail free card, no problem. And then if they don't make their quota, then they go into the records review and okay, based on this completely arbitrary nonsense that we've written on a piece of paper for you every year, we're going to decide who, quote unquote, is the best. And the people at the bottom of the stack are going to get kicked out.
I think what made me want to write this paper and talk about this idea was the injustices I felt like I'd incurred that weren't deliberately made decision by anyone. They just felt like these relics that existed for no reason. No one knew why. No one could explain why they were doing it. It doesn't make sense. They just repeat some trite phrase or quote some doctrine that didn't have a logical genesis, and that was the reason. That was the reason I didn't get promoted. That was the reason I couldn't get the job I wanted. That was the reason I couldn't stay in an area that I was really good at, and they were moving me to something else. It was all just, it all dated back to the fact that we used to accomplish objectives by throwing bodies at problems.
Yeah. I can't even tell you. If we had my boss as a special guest in this podcast, I couldn't count the number of times that I had asked him a question not expecting an answer, because I would say, I'm going to ask you a question, and not because I care, but because I want you to understand that you are making a deliberate decision about X. And I don't care what your answer is, but it needs to be thought about, and you need to understand that by making this decision, you're also making 5 others that you may not be aware of.
Yeah, well, I think we'll end with that giant question mark hanging in the air.
All right, well, hey, no, we're not ending on that. No. King for a day, Ben. What fixes this problem? Where does the military need to go?
Okay, king for a day. I think it would require, it would have to come from the top. I think, I think we need to double down on the idea that our military, even though it's run by people wearing uniforms, ultimately they answer to people that are elected civilians.
Okay.
And I think we need to take that one step further. I saw this happen in the UK to great effect. They brought in a C-suite executive with private experience and not the knowledge and invested interest and historical background of having been in the military. And they said, come in and help us fix our information technology enterprise.
Okay.
That's your only job. You don't got to answer these other people. We're going to give you sweeping powers. We're going to let you step on toes and break rules. And he did it. And then the dust settled and things changed. And I think you could do that with this kind of stuff. If you brought in, instead of saying, take our promotion system or our training system or our organization and tweak them mildly and see if you can make everything better. No, come in and just lay waste. Like, what's the right way to do this and make it work, and then we'll clean up after the fact.
I think my solution is stop pretending that every person that walks in off the street as an 18-year-old kid could be the next George S. Patton Jr. Like, stop this delusion that just because you're a good airman means that you're going to be a good NCO, means you're going to be a good senior NCO, means you could be a good officer. Like, just quit. Draw some brackets. There we have junior enlisted, we have mid-level enlisted, we have senior enlisted. Same thing, officer at the officer scale, and hire for that. Like, I'm a recruiter. I'm out here. I'm looking for like a radar technician specialist. I need some mechanics. Like, I'm not hiring an E1 that's going to basic training. I'm hiring an E4 that has technical knowledge.
Yeah.
I'll send him to military training.
Yep. You're going after one of the same things I mentioned earlier. It's the pipeline problem.
Yes.
I think that everyone starts from scratch and moves up to the top.
Well, I've experienced
instead of just
this.
targeting for the top from the beginning.
I was the supervisor of a technical sergeant that got promoted to master sergeant. And I saw him on both ends of this. As a tech sergeant, he was killing it. He was the best in the biz. Like, he knew his job. He ran his team great, but he was still a technical guy. He was still just like the senior repair dude for the system that he was working on. He promoted to master sergeant, and his requirements shifted. Now you are a manager. You don't do the work. Your job is making sure that the work gets done and all the administrative
so good at that,
stuff.
Was he?
He was terrible.
And there's no way to take it back.
Within 3 months, me, the junior enlisted or junior officer guy, had to give him.
What a tragedy!
I had to punish him. Be like, dude, you are sucking at this new job that we gave you, that we required you to take. Yes, exactly.
Like, what if we could just undo it? Be like, okay, sorry, we made a mistake. We'll just move you back down, tech sergeant, give your old job, and everything's fine.
Or give him the option. Like, hey, do you want to move up and promote, or do you just want to live here? Continue to grow in your position and just be the best that you can be. This is what the Army does with warrant officers for their helicopter pilots. Yeah. We need to do that with pilots in the Air Force so bad, it's crazy. Do you just want to fly planes? Then fly planes. Don't pretend that you can be in charge of bigger organizations because you don't know anything about how these things run.
Yes. Yeah. And I think all of those relate to this DNA of the military that's about how replaceable an individual is.
I think you're right.
All right. Well, Josh, you had proposed as a potential idea for a future show the animated series Arcane on Netflix.
I love how you softball this. Like, you have gently recommended once or twice. I have been hammering at you for actual years. This is an awesome story and an awesome show, and it is worth your time. And finally, you're caving and you're agreeing to watch it.
Okay, so I'm going to check it out. listeners, if you want to join in, go check out Arcane on Netflix, and Josh and I will probably talk about it in episode 117, the Bad at Magic podcast. If you want to weigh in on replaceability or pile on against me for cheating at Magic, or talk about trauma from your childhood, you can join in the discussion with us on Facebook on our page, or you can go to our subreddit, and we'd love to hear what you have to say.
If you like what we do, consider sharing us with a friend. If you like us, maybe your friends will like us too. If you really want to show us some love, consider taking your phone out of your pocket and giving us a good review on the podcast player of your choice. It's crazy the visibility we can get from a single 5-star review, and thank you if you already have. If you want me to beat up Ben about random stuff because he thinks wrong from now until the end of time, please consider becoming a patron on our Patreon page.
And until next time, try to be a little less bad at magic.